Robb Stark could feel the raw tension in the wind long before the campfires were extinguished. He stood at the edge of the small clearing where the outskirts of his army had settled for the evening, gazing beyond the tents and the banners drooping in the cool air. He was the king in the north. But tonight, a different sort of burden weighed on his shoulders. The moon was high overhead, a thin smile amidst the dark, as if mocking him. Beside him, his dire wolf, Grey Wind, paced and occasionally brushed his furry flank against Robb's legs. The dairy wolf was restless too, sensing the tension thrumming in its master's veins. Far across the terrain, the faint glow of torches from the twins flickered like a constellation set too low. There lay Lord Walder Frey's seat, perched above the green fork of the Trident, a place that had become the axis of uncertain alliances and whispered betrayals. Robb's hand drifted to the pommel of his sword, and he breathed in the brisk autumn air. He told himself he had to trust in the plan, or everything would fall apart. The very notion of entrusting any plan to a secret so fragile that only a select few among his closest advisors knew of it made him uneasy. But what choice remained? Even as his men whispered that he had broken his oath to wed one of Walder Frey's daughters, that he had spurned an alliance he desperately needed, Robb fought to keep his composure. He was not at ease with what he must do, but he believed wholeheartedly it was necessary to ensure not only his victory, but the security of his people. He had learned from his mistakes at Oxcross and from past dealings with allies who turned coat at the slightest provocation. He was king now, no longer just the boy who rode south to avenge his father. Kings had to be cunning as much as they were honorable, or so it seemed to him this night. He exhaled slowly, turning to walk back through the rows of tents. Soldiers recognized him even in the dimness, offering stiff salutes or dipping their heads in deference. Some were men who had been at his side since the earliest battles, trusting him because he was Ned Stark's son, the young wolf who never lost a battle. Others were fresh arrivals, uncertain recruits, who heard the rumors swirling about the Freys, about betrayal, and about an upcoming wedding that would unite or ruin them all. Robb saw the question in their eyes. He felt their need for reassurance. But to reassure them, he would have to lie outright, and he was not keen to do that. So he simply nodded and moved on, letting the soldiers think the look on his face was confidence rather than carefully concealed anxiety. Inside the large command tent, the air smelled of hot cider and the faint trace of old sweat. Catelyn Stark sat near a brazier, her expression drawn, eyes distant. She wore a dark cloak lined with fur. At the sound of her son's footsteps, she lifted her gaze. He approached slowly, lowering himself onto a wooden stool across from her. Between them, a small table was spread with maps of the Riverlands. Tiny wooden markers indicated the positions of various forces. Frey men, Mallister men, remnants of the Lannister host far away. Each marker was symbolic of a danger or an asset, and each symbol told its own silent story of looming conflict. Catelyn's voice was barely above a whisper. "Are you certain it must happen this way? This is not what your father would have chosen." Her words struck him in the gut, but he steeled himself. "We've gone too far to turn back," he said. "If we show any sign of hesitation, the Freys will sense it. Lord Walder is cunning. He's ancient, but he's sharp as a dagger's edge." Robb paused. "You've seen how he treats potential allies. We can't blindly trust him, not after what we've heard." Catelyn nodded slowly, her eyes reflecting a torment that mirrored his own. "Roose Bolton said the Freys would never forgive us for the slight. Others whisper that Lord Walder might be dealing with Tywin Lannister in secret." She folded her hands together, pressing them tightly. "Yet you insist on going through with the wedding. That means we are placing ourselves in their power." Robb set his jaw. "No, we'll make them think we're in their power. That's the difference. We can't simply refuse an alliance with Lord Walder. He holds the crossing, and we need it. If not now, then soon enough. He's too influential among the Riverlords to dismiss outright, and I've no illusions about how far his spite might reach." Robb moved a marker on the map to one side, adjusting the formation that represented his trusted bannerman. "Mother, you know me. I don't relish deceit. But we're at war. Every good man or woman is a potential target for treachery. Better we set our own trap and keep the upper hand." Catelyn's shoulders trembled beneath the cloak. Do the men know? A select few, Robb replied. I trust them to keep quiet. If rumors spread to the wrong ears, we lose all advantage. There's no telling who might carry a whisper back to Lord Walder. Or worse, to Harrenhal, where Roose Bolton claims to be our ally. Yet we know how quickly alliances can shift. She nodded, as if trying to reconcile herself to this necessary darkness in her son's leadership. Have you told Edmure any of this? He's the one who will be wedding Roslin, is he not? Until. Robb sighed. I told him pieces of it. Enough that he won't be entirely caught off guard by strange events, but not so much that he might give us away in a careless moment. Edmure is honorable, a good man, but too impulsive in conversation. And he's desperate to prove himself after the debacle at the stone mill. He wants to do right by our family to atone. He'll play his part, or so I hope. Outside, a burst of laughter echoed through the darkness. Some drunken soldier, or a cluster of them passing ale around a fire. The sharp bark of gray wind followed, as though the direwolf was unsettled by the sudden sound. Robb felt a pang of guilt for even letting men celebrate, when so much hinged on secrecy. He forced the thought away. Soldiers needed some release, especially during war. Joy was fleeting, even if half of it was fueled by ignorance of what truly lay ahead. After a moment, Catelyn spoke again. I recall the first time we crossed the twins, how you promised to wed one of his daughters or granddaughters. I never imagined how that small concession could lead to so much turmoil. You regret it, don't you? Nemnon? I regret many things, he replied softly. But Father always taught me that once a mistake is made, the only thing left is to do better the next time. We can't undo the past. We can only face the consequences and shape them to our will if we're strong enough. He paused, gazing at the map. That's what I intend to do here. I will meet Walder Frey's cunning with cunning of my own, and I will ensure he can't betray us without suffering a heavy cost. Catelyn lapsed into silence, and Robb realized she was looking at him with a mixture of pride and sorrow. She might have seen a glimmer of Ned Stark's calm determination in his eyes, or perhaps she only saw a young man aging too quickly under the weight of a crown he never expected to wear. Eventually, she reached over and clasped his hand gently. I'll support you, Robb. Whatever transpires, you are still my son. May the gods grant that none of this tears us apart. He returned her gesture with a firm squeeze. Thank you, Mother. Your counsel helps guide me. I only hope the gods are kind. They lingered in quiet reflection. Robb listened to the crackle of the brazier's fire, which had a strangely calming effect. In that moment, he felt the deep ache of missing his father, wishing Ned Stark could have guided him in dealing with Walder Frey. But Ned was gone, his head struck from his shoulders in King's Landing, and that left Robb alone with a war to win. He knew the cost of losing was more than his own life. The entire North was at stake, as well as the loyalty of the River Lords who had bent the knee to him. If Walder Frey planned something, some monstrous betrayal, Robb would ensure it was the Freys who walked into the jaws of doom. When he left the tent, Grey Wind was there, faithfully waiting. The direwolf's golden eyes flickered in the torchlight, as if to say, I will defend you. Robb rested a hand on the beast's thick fur, drawing strength from the primal bond they shared. Soon, he muttered under his breath, though it was unclear whether he spoke to the wolf or to himself. Soon, we'll walk into the twins, but not as lambs to the slaughter. He strode across the damp grass to his own tent, where a pair of guards in stark livery saluted. Inside, he found a simple cot, a travel chest, and a small table bearing a flickering candle. The hour was late, and the day had been one of endless planning, yet he doubted he would sleep. Each time he closed his eyes, visions of betrayal and bloodshed invaded his thoughts. He reminded himself that a trap only succeeded if the enemy did not suspect it. If Walder Frey sniffed out their gambit, it could lead to disaster. But perhaps, Robb told himself, Lord Walder wouldn't think the young wolf capable of outwitting him. Let him keep that arrogance. Let him think me naive. He sank onto the edge of the cot, unbuckled his sword belt, and let it rest against the trunk. In the corner, Grey Wind settled down, emitting a low rumble from time to time. Once, Robb nearly drifted off to a restless doze. but a nearby clang of metal startled him. He took a moment to calm his racing heart. The tension wouldn't leave him, not tonight. Instead, he stared at the candle flame until it burned low, thinking through the final pieces of the plan he had orchestrated, piece by piece, with a handful of trusted allies. Let dawn come, he thought. Let it bring the next step toward this dark wedding. When morning arrived, a thin fog draped itself over the camp, curling around the tents and drifting along the riverbanks. Soldiers moved about in silence, carefully packing their provisions, adjusting harnesses on the horses, and receiving final orders. Robb emerged from his tent with a heavy cloak around his shoulders and scanned the faces that passed him by. No one seemed particularly cheerful, yet there was no open dread either. The vow of secrecy appeared to hold. A few of the men had anxious eyes, but most carried themselves with that rigid acceptance of soldiers marching to a place uncertain but necessary. Robb led his host to the outskirts of the Twins by midday. The fortress loomed ahead, the pair of massive towers connected by a stone bridge, rising from either side of the river. The water below was dull gray, reflecting a sun that had barely broken through the overcast sky. Walder Frey's banners hung limp in the lackluster breeze, and from his vantage Robb could see movement along the ramparts. Guards, servants, and who knew who else. Edmure Tully rode beside him, the older man wearing a haunted look. His bride-to-be was in that fortress, a sweet girl named Roslin, or so it was said. Robb had hardly met her, but Edmure was to wed her in the name of patching up the slight Robb had committed by marrying Talisa instead of a Frey daughter. Talisa was absent now, back at River Run with the majority of Robb's household retinue, so that Lord Walder would not take further insult by seeing the woman who had supplanted his daughter's place. Robb wished his wife were at his side, but in the end, her presence might only stir up old resentments. "Your Grace," Edmure said quietly, tapping the flank of his horse with a nervous hand. "I still don't understand why we bring so many men into the castle. Lord Walder assured us the wedding feast would be a small affair, with only a handful of our retinue required." "Nah." Robb shot him a measured glance. "Lord Walder assured us many things before, didn't he? We are an army, Edmure. I will not leave my men vulnerable outside the walls should something unforeseen happen. It's a show of good faith on his part that we be allowed entry with a significant portion of our guard." Edmure's lips pressed into a thin line. He said as many men as can fit into the hall, though he did not seem pleased by the notion. "He never seems pleased by anything," Robb noted with a trace of grim humor. "But see how he preens and complains, then does as we ask. He wants us off guard. We must remain vigilant." Edmure looked forward, shoulders tense. "I only pray that Roslin is as kind as they say. I fear her father's cunning might overshadow her own goodness." Robb kept his gaze on the fortress. "Treat her kindly, Edmure. She's a pawn in all this, just as many of us are. If she has a good heart, she will need our support." Then they reached the main gates, and a detachment of Frey guards welcomed them with stiff bows. Here, the crossing between the towers yawned open, and the water lapped below. The gloom of the stone walls pressed in, bringing a suffocating sense of enclosure. As Robb led the column forward, he felt gray wind's hackles rise. The direwolf walked alongside his horse, emitting low whines now and then. Soldiers from House Frey eyed the beast warily. Yet they parted and allowed the Stark men to pass. Inside the courtyard, a few Frey cousins and lesser scions came out to greet them. Robb recognized Black Walder, whose face always seemed ready for a fight, and Lothar Frey, the man called Lame Lothar, who had a crooked leg but a sharp mind. The old Lord Walder Frey was not present, which did not surprise Robb in the least. He imagined the old man was perched on some dais within the great hall, waiting to make a grand entrance or hurl an insult at them in his own keep. For now, though, pleasantries were exchanged. Bowing, forced smiles, talk of wedding preparations, and how delighted House Frey was to be receiving the king in the north once again. Robb's eyes flickered around, noting archers on the walls. He made note of vantage points, windows, and locked gates. All the details that might matter if trouble stirred. It was a cautious exercise, a habit formed on countless battlefields. Here, inside these walls, A betrayal could be catastrophic if he were unprepared. Catelyn arrived with her own retinue slightly behind him, carrying herself with a regal dignity that only came from being raised in the halls of Riverrun. She inclined her head to Black Walder and Lothar, speaking politely but with a reserved edge. Edmure dismounted and was soon whisked away by a gaggle of Frey women, presumably to meet with his bride. Robb silently prayed that Edmure would remember their conversations and keep his tongue guarded. They were shown to private quarters on one side of the twins where the guests of honor would stay until the ceremony. The chamber given to Robb was small and drafty, though decently furnished with a canopied bed and a hearth that took the chill off. Gray wind settled in the corner, staring at the door as if he expected a threat to materialize at any moment. Robb sat on the edge of the bed, removing his gloves and running a hand through his auburn hair. He was thankful for a moment to catch his breath. This was only the start of the wedding festivities. The feast would be later, perhaps even the next day, if Walder Frey decided to stretch out the formalities. Good. That would give Robb more time to ensure all was in place for the trap. He did not plan for a massacre. No. What he intended was more intricate, more subtle. A way to ensure that if Walder Frey took a single step toward harming the king in the north, he and his entire brood would be at Robb's mercy. The soldiers stationed in certain strategic points had instructions on how to seal corridors, how to block archers from vantage points, how to isolate the Great Hall once the feast began. Even in the yard there would be men ready. Those men believed they were simply a show of force, but a handful knew the deeper truth. If Robb gave the signal, they would barricade the gates, block the portcullises, and turn Lord Walder's fortress into a cage. A soft rap came at the chamber door. Before Robb could respond, the door opened a crack to admit Roose Bolton. The man wore his usual half-smile, but it never reached his pale eyes. Bolton was a bannerman in theory, yet Robb never fully trusted him. Still, for this plan to work, he needed his lords with him, particularly those who had influence in the Riverlands. Robb rose to his feet, acknowledging Bolton with a terse nod. "My lord," Roose said in his quiet tone, "I see you are settling in." The arrangements for the wedding proceed. Lord Walder is in rare form, uttering curses about the last time we crossed his threshold, cursing all Starks but evidently satisfied enough to host us once more. Though he does make a point of reminding everyone of your broken oath at every turn. Robb felt a flicker of irritation. Let him talk. Words can't cut as deep as swords. If he's content to vent his outrage through insults, that's a small price to pay. Nine. Bolton's lips thinned in what might have been a semblance of a grin. Quite so. I had a few words with Lothar. He seems eager for this alliance, if only to secure better prospects for House Frey. But in my experience, these Freys have shifting loyalties like a river after heavy rains. I know, Robb replied. We must be vigilant. We'll go through the motions. But if they suspect we have plans of our own... Bolton raised a pale hand. I know the importance of discretion. But if I may, Your Grace, I'd caution you to remain on your guard around any Frey you do not know personally. Even the children are rumored to be cunning. However, I am curious. What exactly is your intended strategy if events unfold violently? Will we truly be able to contain the Freys here in their own seat? And Robb regarded the man carefully. Roose Bolton might be an ally for now, but that didn't mean Robb would divulge every detail. I have men stationed where they need to be. If it comes to bloodshed, we'll strike first and ensure there is no escape. I want no chance of them turning on us halfway through the wedding feast. Let them dance to our tune, not the other way around. Tune. Bolton gave a small bow of acknowledgement. Very good, Your Grace. My men stand ready if needed. He paused, then turned to go, saying over his shoulder, In the meantime, I'll mingle among the Freykin, see what whispers I might pick up. The Dreadfort has its own reputation, and fear sometimes loosens tongues. After Bolton left, Robb took a moment to breathe. He was aware that trusting Roose Bolton was a gamble. The man was known for his eerie calm, his cold cunning, and the cruelty attributed to him back in the north. But perhaps that cruelty would serve Robb's cause if it kept the Freys in check. Or perhaps it would serve Bolton's own agenda. Robb prayed the gods that the monster in Bolton wouldn't be unleashed against the Starks. Not yet. Time passed slowly within the stone corridors of the twins. Servants bustled about, preparing for a feast that might happen later that day, or perhaps the following day. The Freys were notoriously erratic, so no precise time had been confirmed. Meanwhile, Robb used each hour to gather intelligence. Small scouts patrolled outside the castle, ensuring there were no Lannister forces lurking nearby. Inside, a handful of Robb's loyal bannermen made polite conversation with the Frey household, probing for signs of unusual troop movements or hidden weapons. All the while, Robb maintained his composure, wearing the face of a young king trying to make amends for a breach of promise. He let them see he was uncomfortable with Walder Frey's many complaints and sly remarks. At last, as dusk approached, they received word that the wedding ceremony would take place at midday on the morrow. That meant a night of preparation and tension for everyone involved. Edmure, looking rather pale, confided to Robb that Roslin seemed pleasant enough, though she wept often. Edmure thought her tears were from terror at marrying a stranger and the weight of her family's scorn. Robb privately wondered if she wept because she suspected something far more terrible lurking beneath the wedding surface. Either way, Edmure tried to show kindness, but it seemed Roslin was too frightened to smile. When darkness fell, the wedding eve was marked by a subdued atmosphere. Robb dined in a side chamber with his mother, Edmure, and a few of his lords, each picking at plates of roast and bread that tasted of ash to Robb's anxious mind. Walder Frey himself did not appear. Apparently, the old man preferred to dine in his private quarters. Some Frey cousins mingled, exchanging forced pleasantries. Black Walder glowered at anyone who dared to question him, while others seemed more eager to gossip about the king and the North's spurned vow. Robb excused himself early and retreated to his chamber, where he sat in silence before the fireplace. Grey Wind dozed nearby, occasionally twitching in his sleep. Through a narrow window slit, Robb glimpsed the moon. He still could not sleep. The risk of failure haunted him. If, at any point, the Freys realized the Starks were laying a trap, they might strike first. That was the nature of dealing with the snake. Show any hint of aggression, and the snake might bite. So he had to remain watchful and carefully coordinate his men, ensuring they did not move into place too soon. His thoughts drifted to Talisa, safe at River Run for now. He prayed she would remain that way. He wished he could have asked her counsel, for she was wise in ways different from those around him. But she also had a gentle heart, and he did not want her to see him stooping to deceptions and traps. Sometimes, being a king meant walking through darkness alone. Morning dawned gray and cold. The wedding day. Robb woke after a restless half-sleep and immediately convened with some of his officers. They spoke in hushed tones in a cramped corridor near the kitchens, where the smell of fresh bread mingled with the stale scents of damp stone. The officers confirmed their men stood ready at key points, waiting for the feast. If there was to be any violence, it would most likely erupt during or immediately after the ceremony, once the main doors of the Great Hall were closed and the celebrants were crowded in. Robb nodded, satisfied that they had covered as many angles as possible. He parted from them and went to find Edmure, to ensure the groom was prepared for what lay ahead. They found Edmure in a small antechamber, wearing a fine doublet of tully blue. He looked more composed than the previous evening, though his eyes remained wary. Catelyn fussed with his collar, reminding him of certain courtesies he was to extend to Roslin. Robb observed them quietly from the threshold, noticing how Edmure's face softened whenever Roslin's name was mentioned, even if it was tempered by worry. Perhaps there was a chance for genuine warmth between them, improbable though it might seem. In these violent days, any spark of real affection was a rare boon. As midday approached, the wedding party assembled in the Great Hall. Lord Walder Frey emerged at last, hobbling along, flanked by a swarm of offspring. He eyed Robb with open disdain, but offered a thin greeting. The hall was decorated in a meager show of finery. Threadbare tapestries, strings of dried flowers, and candles that cast flickering shadows on the high rafters. The assembled crowd comprised the large brood of Freys, interspersed with Stark men and Tully men. Robb could see some of his people eyeing the Freys with suspicion. Equally, He caught glimpses of Frey guards exchanging nods with one another. The air was thick with unspoken tension. Roslin Frey entered, head bowed, accompanied by two sour-faced aunts. She wore a pale gown that might have been lovely, if not for its ill-fitting cut, and the sadness in her eyes. When she reached Edmure, she risked a shy glance upward. Her cheeks were flushed, and tears glimmered on her lashes. But Edmure reached out and gently pressed her hand, which seemed to calm her somewhat. The Septon began the words of binding, and the entire hall quieted to a hushed murmur. Robb stood beside his mother, occasionally feeling the curious gazes of the Freys upon him. He kept his face unreadable, focusing on the ceremony. As the Septon led Edmure and Roslin through the rites, Robb could almost forget his own anxious mission. For a brief moment, it felt like a real wedding, an attempt to bind houses and hearts. Yet the tension refused to release its hold on the corners of the hall, especially as Walder Frey coughed and muttered curses under his breath. When the vows were spoken and the Septon pronounced Edmure and Roslin man and wife, a smattering of applause echoed through the chamber. Walder Frey motioned for the wedding feast to commence, and servants began to file in, setting dishes along the tables. The great hall was not so grand as the halls of Winterfell or Riverrun, but it had enough space for all the principal guests. Robb noted how many of his men were present, armed but in formal attire. More importantly, he knew there were Stark and Tully soldiers outside the hall, ready to seal entrances if needed. They took their seats at the high table, Walder Frey presiding with an expression of smug satisfaction. Edmure and Roslin sat side by side, the bride trembling slightly whenever Walder shot her a glare. Robb and Catelyn sat near them, the king in the north and the lady of Riverrun, ironically at the mercy of this crotchety old lord, at least to outward appearances. The feast began with modest fanfare. Trenchers of roast mutton, flagons of ale and wine, steaming vegetables, and loaves of dark bread. Musicians started playing soft, meandering tunes that filled the hall with a subdued merriment. Walder Frey raised a goblet in a half-hearted toast, welcoming the guests and making jibes about the tardiness of certain kings. Robb merely inclined his head, letting the old man talk. Some of the Frey daughters giggled at the barbs, others looked embarrassed. Slowly, conversation rippled across the tables. Robb ate little, mostly sipping from his cup of wine to keep up appearances. He scanned the hall, meeting the eyes of certain allies who understood the plan. Roose Bolton appeared entirely at ease, calmly sampling a plate of pickled onions. The Grachan sat a few seats away, nearly brimming with suppressed energy, though he masked it behind hearty laughter. Other northern lords engaged in forced small talk with Frey cousins. Beneath it all, the tension wound tighter. At length, Walder Frey stood, leaning on a cane for support. He gestured for the music to cease. "We have witnessed this union between House Tully and House Frey," he croaked. "You all know how this came to pass. The king in the north, in his great wisdom, promised us a match for himself, then delivered not even a letter when he broke that promise. So, Edmure Tully was offered as restitution. Now, I suppose I can find it in my heart to show some semblance of forgiveness." He let out a phlegmy chuckle. "I trust the king in the north is grateful for my hospitality." Robb rose politely, turning toward Walder Frey. "I am indeed grateful, Lord Walder," he said in a neutral tone. "You have shown respect for our alliance by allowing this wedding to take place in your halls. For that, I thank you." "Oh, we are all so thankful, aren't we?" Walder's voice dripped with sarcasm. He squinted at Robb. "And does your grace think to make me a further promise today? Perhaps you'll vow not to break your word again." A hush fell. Robb waited a beat before answering, controlling the flicker of anger in his chest. "I can vow this, Lord Walder. You and your house shall have the friendship of the king in the north so long as you remain true friends to us in turn. May this wedding mark a new beginning, not an end." "Benatar." Walder Frey sniffed, then spat on the floor, eliciting a few shocked gasps. "We shall see, we shall see. Eat and drink now, all of you. It's a wedding after all." The musicians resumed their playing, and conversation sputtered back to life. Robb sat, ignoring the churn in his stomach. He saw Catelyn's tight expression, the naked disgust in her eyes for Walder's show of disrespect, but she schooled her features into a mask of calm, as a lady must. Down the table, Edmure gently squeezed Roslin's hand, as if to reassure her that not all men are as cruel as her father. Gradually, the pace of the feast picked up. Wine flowed more freely, and the Freys seemed to relish in their cups. Some of them rose to dance, though the dancers looked more like awkward shufflers than skilled courtiers. A few of Robb's soldiers joined in, half-heartedly stepping to the music, likely more interested in scoping out the hall's layout. Catelyn eventually moved to speak with Roslin, offering some motherly comfort, while Edmure endured a barrage of well wishes from drunken Frey cousins. Robb felt a presence at his elbow, and glanced to find Lothar Frey beside him, wearing a polite but insincere smile. The man's limp was more pronounced tonight, perhaps from the lengthy ceremony. "Your Grace," Lothar said smoothly, inclining his head. "I must say, it's a relief to see the houses joined. My father might be difficult, but in the end, he wants what's best for our house. We all do." Robb forced a smile. "Of course. Peace benefits all, does it not?" Lothar gave a gentle bow. "Indeed. If you will excuse me, I must see to some details regarding the bedding ceremony. You know how our traditions can be." He offered a small laugh. Robb nodded, letting him go. The bedding ceremony was a custom he found distasteful, but it was typical of Westerosi weddings. Soon enough, the raucous call for the bedding would start, the men carrying the bride off, the women carrying the groom. In that chaos, if treachery were planned, it might manifest. He felt his pulse accelerate, anticipating the moment. One of his men, seated at a side table, caught his eye and gave a slight nod. They were ready. At last, a great boisterous roar filled the hall. "To the bedding!" someone cried. Laughter and cheers erupted. Women converged on Edmure, giggling and teasing, while men advanced on Roslin, who looked more terrified than ever. Edmure tried to be gallant, letting the women peel off parts of his clothing as they paraded him out of the hall. Meanwhile, the men, some half-drunk, reached for Roslin, plucking at her gown's ties and ribbons. She cast a pleading glance around, but custom was custom. Robb could do nothing except watch as they carried the bride and groom out, each group heading to the bedchamber to deposit them for their wedding night. The entire procession left the great hall in a swirl of color and laughter. As they vanished, Walder Frey stood at his seat, leaning heavily on the table. "Come now, we have a moment of peace from all the wedding fuss. Let us drink once more to King Robb's health." He raised a cup, watery eyes shining with an odd gleam. "May he father many wolves with his foreign bride." Laughter rippled through the hall. Robb felt the muscle in his jaw tighten, but he raised his own goblet, out of necessity, feigning a polite smile. He took a careful sip, noticing an odd hush settling over the hall. The musicians had stopped playing. A cold prickle danced along the back of his neck. This was it. The moment of greatest vulnerability. He set his goblet down. Time slowed. He saw Walder Frey's thin lips curl into something like a grin. Before the old man could speak again, the great Joan erupted with a hearty laugh from across the table, rising so forcefully that his chair toppled behind him. "A toast," the great Joan boomed, lifting his own cup. "A toast to the new bride and groom, and to old Walder's generosity." His voice bellowed through the hall, echoing off the rafters. For a heartbeat, everyone froze. Walder Frey's mouth opened in surprise at being preempted. Robb felt a surge of relief. Though he kept his face neutral, the great Joan's timing was perfect. A small part of the plan. Divert attention. By a heartbeat or two for Robb's men to shift into position outside the hall. The large man roared with laughter, beckoning the minstrels to strike up a song. After an awkward pause, the musicians complied, starting a jaunty tune that seemed out of place in the tension. Lord Walder glared, obviously displeased at having been overshadowed. But he forced a smile, raising his cup again. The moment of direct confrontation had passed, replaced by a forced festivity. Some of the Freys joined in the toast, while others sank back into their seats, watchful eyes trained on the Stark men. Robb was certain he saw half a dozen stealthy motions near the edges of the hall. A glint of steel here, a step forward there. He inhaled slowly, keeping his posture relaxed. He looked at Catelyn, who returned his gaze, a flicker of warning in her expression. She sensed the tension, as did he. Neither of them spoke, but each realized that any second might bring the final turn. Either Walder Frey and his men would strike, or they would wait. For now, the hall was a precarious balance of forced merriment and concealed dread. Robb fixed his gaze on Walder Frey, who was muttering to a cluster of his kin near the high table. Let him wonder, Robb thought. Let him think we're still naive. If he dares make a move, we'll be ready. All around them, the wine continued to pour, the music played, and laughter occasionally erupted, yet it felt to Robb like the hush before the crack of thunder. Within the next minutes, the betting party would return or the next phase of the evening's festivities would commence. Either scenario provided Walder Frey an opportunity to strike first if he intended to. Robb's men were prepared, but tension still gnawed at him. He forced himself to adopt an air of calm, leaning back in his seat as if enjoying the show. However, his hand drifted near the hilt of his sword. Grey Wind was outside the hall, penned up because Walder Frey had objected to a direwolf in the Great Hall. That had worried Robb, but he'd stationed his men there with explicit instructions. If violence erupted inside, they would free Grey Wind, and the direwolf would barrel into the hall to protect him. The beast would catch the scent of blood in an instant. For a moment Robb thought he heard a distant snarl, but it might have been only the wind pressing through the cracks in the walls. A hush fell again as Walder Frey lifted his cane and tapped it against the stone floor. The minstrel's tune faltered. He turned to face Robb once more, an unpleasant gleam in his eye. "Your Grace," he rasped, "I believe we owe our guests a proper song, one that honors the late Lord Hoster Tully and the new Lord of Riverrun. Let us play." He never finished his sentence. A commotion broke out at the far end of the hall, near the main doors. Shouts erupted, followed by the clang of metal. Every head in the hall whipped around, and Walder Frey's eyes widened. Robb stood instantly, toppling his own chair in the process. He saw half a dozen of his guards surge forward, swords drawn. The Frey guards also drew weapons. Screams rent the air as guests realized the feast had turned to chaos in the blink of an eye. Robb's heart hammered. His plan was in motion. Or had the Freys triggered it first? Before Walder Frey could bark an order, Robb's men by the doors slammed them shut, sealing off the great hall. A knot of Frey men tried to force the doors open from the inside, but more Stark soldiers came up behind them. Steel clashed. The Greatjan unleashed a booming war cry, flipping a table to create a makeshift barricade. Catelyn stood at Robb's side, her face ashen but resolute. Robb's eyes locked on Walder Frey, whose face had contorted with rage and confusion. "What is the meaning of this?" the old man screeched, flecks of spittle flying from his mouth. Robb drew his sword, holding it level. "Lord Walder, I'm afraid the wedding feast is over," he said in a hard voice. "You are not the only one who sets traps." Chaos erupted in full. Freys and Starks lunged at each other, while others scrambled for cover. The minstrels abandoned their instruments, pushing toward any exit they could find. Somewhere near the dais, a Frey crossbowman tried to raise his weapon, only to be tackled by a Stark soldier. Walder Frey's cane went clattering to the ground, and the old man stumbled back, eyes bulging. For a split second, he looked every bit his age, frail and aghast, but the fury in his glare reminded Robb this was far from finished. Throughout the hall, the plan was unfolding. Stark men advanced methodically, taking control of vantage points, disarming Frey guards, and cutting down any who resisted. Black Walder bellowed, rallying a knot of Frey swordsmen, who clashed with a group of Tully men. The ring of steel on steel echoed in the high rafters, and the stench of sweat and fear mingled with the aromas of spilled wine and overturned plates of food. Catelyn seized a dagger from a fallen man's belt. She pressed her back to Robb's, a fierce determination in her eyes. He dared not let her fight alone, but he also needed to keep his gaze on Walder Frey, the spider at the center of this tangled web. The old man might have one last venomous strike ready. Across the hall, some guests cowered under tables, shrieking in terror. A few of them were Frey women, too young or too timid to fight, and some were children. Robb felt a pang at the sight, but he forced himself to focus. No matter how wretched Walder Frey was, it wasn't in Robb's nature to slaughter the helpless. He would secure the old man, then put an end to the bloodshed. That was the plan. He had to maintain the moral high ground, even in this desperate moment. He advanced on Walder Frey. Sword at the ready. "Call off your men," he commanded. "We can end this with no more blood spilled." Walder Frey bared his teeth like a cornered rat. "You dare threaten me in my own hall?" He wheezed. Then he turned and screeched, "Kill them! Kill the wolflings!" But his cry rang hollow, for the Frey men found themselves outmaneuvered. Robb's orchestrations were bearing fruit. The entrances and exits were under Stark control, and the old man's line of retreat was cut off. Outside, Grey Wind's savage roars could be heard, prowling near the yard, ensuring none escaped that way. Robb lunged, pressing Walder Frey's chest with the flat of the blade, backing him against the high table. The old lord's breath came in ragged gasps, his eyes darting as if searching for an escape. "It didn't have to be like this," Robb said, voice tight with anger and regret. "But your intentions were clear. I know you planned treachery." Walder Frey let out a hacking laugh. "You think you've won, boy? The Lannisters. You won't survive them. This castle will be your tomb." Robb's knuckles clenched around his sword. "Perhaps," he said, "but you won't live to see it." The words tumbled out before he could stop them, but a part of him recoiled. Vengeance was one thing, outright murder of an old man another. Still, the moment was upon him, raw and bloody. Somewhere behind him, Catelyn cried out, "Robb, more of them!" He whipped around to see a group of Frey guards charging from a side corridor, brandishing spears. The Greychen and several Stark men rushed to meet them, steel crashing into steel. Walder Frey took advantage of the distraction, wriggling free from Robb's sword. He turned, stumbling toward a narrow doorway behind the dais, presumably aiming to flee deeper into the castle. Robb cursed and gave chase, grappling with the old man before he could slip away completely. Walder Frey clawed at Robb's face, hissing like a cat, but Robb wrestled him to the ground, pinning him with a knee. "All that you are, all that you've done, ends here," Robb ground out. But even as the words left his lips, he saw Walder Frey's expression shift from fury to something else. A chilling smile curved his wrinkled mouth. Was there another ploy in play? Robb scanned the surroundings. The hall was in chaos. Yet this old man's cunning might extend beyond the battlefield. Robb couldn't be sure if every corner of the twins was truly under his control. He hesitated. Was it wise to execute Walder Frey right now, or better to keep him alive for leverage? That question pounded in Robb's head as the battle in the hall raged on around them. Shouts, screams, and the clang of steel reverberated, weaving a cacophony that felt unreal. With his mother's voice echoing in the fray, with the knowledge that his plan to ensnare the Freys was working, but not yet secure, Robb Stark faced a choice that could decide the fate of the North and beyond. He pressed Walder Frey harder into the cold stone and glanced back at his men, who were slowly overcoming the last Frey holdouts. This was only the first step in a grander game, he reminded himself. Blood dripped from a cut on his arm, a shallow wound inflicted in the melee. He felt the hot sting of it, reminding him that the outcome was far from assured. Yet, for this single moment, the old man who had plotted the Red Wedding now lay in Robb Stark's grasp. Helpless. How quickly the tables could turn. Robb inhaled, letting the tang of blood and sweat fill his lungs. Then he steeled himself, focusing on the wretched lord pinned beneath him. He would decide Walder Frey's fate soon enough. But first, he had to ensure no more of his people died this day. The king in the north had trapped the Freys in their own snare, and the echoes of the battle rang through the twins as though the gods themselves bore witness to this inversion of destiny. It had begun, and in the hall that was meant to be their tomb, the Starks instead unleashed retribution on those who would have betrayed them. Robb Stark kept Walder Frey pinned beneath his knee, feeling the old man's skinny ribs expand and contract in panicked wheezes. All around them, the great hall roared with chaos, steel clashing on steel, Shrieks from terrified bystanders. Angry shouts and curses hurled across upended tables. Robb's mind pulsed with adrenaline, every sense sharpened. He could smell the blood on the floor, see shadows darting along the walls, hear the footfalls of men rushing to secure each exit. They had planned for this, prepared for it. Yet living through the moment felt unreal and precarious. Someone rushed up beside Robb. One of his bannermen, tall, with a dark beard matted by sweat, face contorted in urgency. "Your Grace, the Freys are trying to break through the side passage near the kitchens," the man gasped. "We've blocked them so far, but there's at least 24 men in there, and we're short on numbers." He winced at a crash nearby, jerking his gaze that way. Robb ground his teeth, still keeping Walder Frey pinned. The old man thrashed weakly, sputtering, face purpling as he tried to curse. "Hold them off for as long as you can," Robb commanded, voice tight. "We need to secure Lord Walder first. If he's dead or free, either outcome invites more chaos. Take more men from the main doors if you need to. They're nearly locked down." "Down." The bannerman bowed his head and sprinted off, vanishing into a knot of fighting men. Robb's sword wavered an inch above Walder Frey's throat. The old man glared, defiance in his rheumy eyes. Those watery orbs seemed to contain centuries of malice. Robb's free hand pressed onto the man's shoulder, feeling the brittle bones under thin flesh. He could so easily end it now. He felt the rage swirling in his chest. The memory of his father's head on a spike, the notion of Ned Stark's honorable name spat upon, the fear that had plagued Robb for so long of losing everything. Walder Frey had planned to slaughter him in these same halls if Robb hadn't turned the tables first. A faint shuffle of skirts behind him made Robb glance over his shoulder. His mother stood there, cheeks streaked with tears, hair in disarray. Her eyes flicked from Walder Frey to Robb's blade, and she lifted a hand as though to stay him. "Don't kill him." "Not yet," she said hoarsely, breathing fast. "He might still be of use. We need him to command his men to lay down their arms." Walder Frey coughed out a bitter laugh. "You think I'll bend the knee to you after what you've done? Sneaking into my hall like the thieves you are." Robb's stare burned. "We entered your hall for a wedding. Did you not invite us, my lord?" His words dripped with cold sarcasm. "I see that you had your crossbows ready behind the walls, and you wonder why we came prepared." Walder tried to twist free, but Robb slammed him back against the floor. The old man's breath rattled in his throat. "All that talk of oaths," he spat. "Ned Stark's precious honor, and now here you are, boy, as cunning as a Lannister." Catelyn laid a trembling hand on Robb's shoulder. "Take him prisoner," she urged. "Tie him, gag him if you must. But killing him now might unleash a frenzy of vengeance among his brood. We must think carefully. Once we hold Lord Walder as hostage, the others may yield." Robb nodded reluctantly. Emotions warred inside him. For so long, the memory of this man's hostility, the constant insults, the overshadowing threat of betrayal, he wanted it ended. And yet his mother's logic was sound. Killing Walder Frey might feel good for a heartbeat, but the consequences would ripple outward. They needed leverage over the entire brood, and no leverage was greater than the head of the family himself. He rose, hauling Walder Frey up with him, his sword at the old man's back. A Stark guard rushed over. "Your Grace?" the guard said, uncertain. Robb jerked his head at Walder. "Shackle him. Bind his wrists, and do not let him out of your sight. Post men with crossbows on him if you have to. He's to remain alive until I say otherwise." "Davy?" Walder hissed with fury as the guard twisted his thin arms behind his back and locked them with iron shackles. Another guard shoved a rag into his mouth to stifle any commands or curses. The old lord's eyes bulged, but he was helpless. In that moment, he looked small, no longer the fearsome lord of the crossing, but a scrawny bag of bones in tatters of finery. Robb turned to his mother. "How bad is it?" he asked. Her face reflected the weight of what she'd seen. She opened her mouth, paused, then forced out, "We've gained control of most of the hall. The Great John has cornered a group of Frey soldiers on the balcony. but they're raining arrows down at anyone who tries to come close. Others are trying to force their way into the corridors to take the rest of the keep. It's madness, Robb. Our men are winning, but there's blood everywhere. Guests are cowering under tables. Her voice quavered. Robb exhaled hard. We never wanted to butcher innocents. I'll make sure our men understand. We only strike those who resist. He reached out, gently pressing her hand in thanks. Stay safe, Mother. We will bring this to a swift conclusion if we can. She nodded, face somber. Where will you go? First I'll see that Walder is locked away, Robb answered. Then I'll help the Greyjohn flush out the crossbowmen. If we can secure the hall and the main corridors, the rest might surrender without a prolonged fight. Catelyn squeezed his hand, eyes filled with a swirl of pride and fear. Be careful. He turned and strode through the debris-strewn hall, stepping around fallen benches and plates. An overturned brazier sent up a curl of acrid smoke. Fires flickered in shallow pools of wine. Moans emanated from wounded men clutching their stomachs or legs. The stench of spilled blood mingled with the greasy odor of roasted meat. Robb's stomach churned, but he forced himself to keep going. He was a king in a time of war. He could not flinch from the sight of death. At one side of the hall, 2 Stark guards shoved Walder Frey into a corner, securing him to a thick iron ring that jutted from the wall. They kept crossbows trained on him. Robb paused, staring at the old man one last time. Walder glowered, gag muffling his incoherent rants. Let him stew there, Robb thought grimly. The trap had indeed sprung, but victory remained precarious. He pivoted and spotted Roose Bolton gliding along the edge of the hall, stepping over bodies with eerie calm. His pale eyes slid toward Robb, and he offered a nod that looked almost cordial, as if greeting an old acquaintance at a leisurely feast instead of a battlefield. Robb, chest tight with suspicion, beckoned him closer. They met near a tangle of toppled chairs. My Lord Bolton, Robb said low, noticing the blood splatter on Bolton's cloak. Report, die. Bolton wiped at his cheek with a handkerchief, smearing red across white cloth. It appears you had quite the strategy, Your Grace. My men have aided in taking control of the courtyard, though some of the Freys have barricaded themselves in the tower. I fear we'll need to tear down the doors or starve them out if they won't capitulate. Good, Robb said, still eyeing Bolton warily. Just remember, we want as little needless bloodshed as possible. Our quarrel is with Walder Frey and any who actively fought us. The rest can be spared. Bolton gave a thin smile. As you command, Your Grace. I expect it will take some time to sweep the corridors. The twins are labyrinthine. He paused, then added with a delicate tilt of his head. I trust you are satisfied with the outcome so far. Robb wondered at his tone. We'll see, he answered curtly. The day isn't done. Go, see that your men continue securing the keep. Make sure no one escapes across the bridge without my leave. Bolton dipped his chin and slipped away, disappearing into a swirl of movement near the door. Robb let out a breath. He felt no closer to trusting the man, but for the moment, Bolton was following orders. With Walder Frey in shackles, maybe Bolton's ambition would remain contained, at least until another opportunity arose. Another wave of fierce clanging reverberated from above. On the balcony the Greyjohn was fighting to claim. Robb jogged across the hall, weaving through clusters of battered men. He passed a group of cowering Frey wives who huddled with sobbing children. A pair of his soldiers stood guard over them, making sure no harm came to innocents. Robb gave them an approving nod. The steps leading up to the balcony were narrow and clogged with half-broken chairs. Robb vaulted over them, hearing the Greyjohn's bellow echo off the walls. When he burst through a door onto the balcony, he found a chaotic melee. Half a dozen Frey crossbowmen had hastily erected a barricade of tables and benches, from behind which they loosed bolts at any Stark man who advanced. The Greyjohn, sword in one hand and a battered shield in the other, had 2 men with him, one wounded in the leg. They were pinned behind an upturned table. Bolts thudded into the wood with frightening regularity. Seeing Robb's approach, the Greyjohn let out a roar of relief. Your Grace, he called, voice rumbling like thunder. These filth keep spitting their quarrels. We can't get close unless we fancy walking into a hail of bolts. Robb dropped into a crouch next to him. "We need to flank them or force them to surrender," he said, panting. "Maybe we can come at them from behind that tapestry, or—" He cut off as a crossbow bolt whistled overhead and ricocheted off the stone wall. The Great John unleashed a guttural curse. "My patience is at an end. Let's rush them, your men from the left and me from the right. They can't shoot us all at once." Hades. Robb considered it. A frontal rush might cost them men, but it could overwhelm the Freys if timed correctly. He peered over the edge of the table, glimpsing the shape of their barricade. Another crossbow bolt hissed by, barely missing his cheek. He ducked back. "All right," he muttered, "but we do it smart. I'll call up a few more archers from below. Have them set up behind that column. They can pepper the Freys while we charge." The Great John grinned widely. "A cunning plan, Dada. I like it better than sitting here with my thumb in my arse." Robb signaled to one of his guards. The man raced off to fetch archers. Moments later, 3 archers clambered up the steps, each with a quiver slung across his back. Robb pointed to a massive column that partially concealed a narrow walkway along the balcony's edge. "You can hit them from there," he said quietly. "Aim for the men with crossbows. Keep their heads down while we charge." The archers nodded and slipped into place, flattening themselves against the stone. The Great John tensed, sword at the ready, excitement lighting his broad face. Robb gripped his own sword tighter, adrenaline pounding through him. He glanced at the men around him, 2 Stark soldiers and a Tully retainer with a shallow cut across his brow. Their eyes shone with a mixture of fear and determination. Robb raised his free hand, counting silently. 1, 2, 3, go. He dropped it. Instantly, the archers sprang out from cover, loosing a volley of arrows. One found its mark in a Frey's throat, another in the shoulder of a man attempting to reload. The remaining Freys let out startled yells, ducking behind their makeshift barrier. Robb roared, "Now!" and surged forward. He vaulted over the upturned table, leading the charge. The Great John bellowed a war cry, matching him step for step. The distance to the barricade was a mere 10 strides, but it felt like a gauntlet of potential bolts. Sure enough, one Frey managed to fire a rushed shot. The quarrel struck the Tully retainer in the chest, dropping him with a strangled gasp. Robb gritted his teeth, pushing forward, the man's death fueling his anger. The Great John smashed into the barricade with his shield, toppling tables and benches in a shower of splinters. Robb sprang onto an overturned bench, sword raised. A Frey crossbowman scrambled backward, fumbling for a dagger. Robb slashed downward, slicing across the man's forearm. The crossbowman cried out, blood spraying on the floor. Another Frey soldier lunged at the Great John, brandishing a short sword. The Great John swung his own blade in a brutal arc that met flesh and bone, sending the man crashing against the railing with a gargled yell. One last crossbowman tried to flee along the balcony, but the Stark archers took him down with a swift arrow to the spine. He toppled face first into the stone with a sickening thud. Then at last, a hush fell over this corner of the battlefield, broken only by the ragged breathing of the survivors. Robb scanned the area, swords still raised in case any Frey remained unaccounted for. All were down. A few coughed and groaned in pain, weapons lying useless at their sides. The Great John panted beside Robb, eyes blazing. "That's the last of them up here, I think," he said. Then he nodded toward the Tully retainer who'd been struck in the chest. The man lay unmoving in a growing puddle of blood. "Damned shame." He fought bravely. Robb let out a slow exhale, lowering his sword. We'll remember him." His gaze drifted to the moaning Freys. Some were dying, others perhaps only wounded. He gestured for the archers to approach. "Bind the ones who can't fight. If they resist, do what you must. But we want them alive if possible." The archers nodded and began tying up the wounded men's wrists. One crossbowman stared at Robb with wide, terrified eyes. He couldn't have been more than 20. His breath rattled as he tried to speak, blood trickling from his lips. Robb recognized the raw fear in that young face. For a moment, he thought of how many lives this war had already consumed. He set his jaw, stepping away. The Great John thumped Robb's shoulder. We should get back downstairs, Your Grace. Make sure no fresh troubles have erupted." He paused, surveying the carnage below. Many men lay still, and others staggered around, searching for friends or checking for survivors. It appeared the fighting in the main hall had mostly ceased, replaced by the muffled cries of the wounded and the uneasy hush of aftermath. Robb nodded, leading them down the steps. When they re-entered the great hall, Robb saw that much of the chaos had quelled. Bodies littered the floor, some in Frey colors, some in Stark or Tully gear. The smell of blood was thick, almost dizzying. Soldiers moved among the tables, tossing aside wreckage, disarming any remaining Freys. Catelyn stood near the dais, speaking quietly with a small cluster of armed men. Robb approached, wanting an update. His mother turned to him, relief shining in her eyes. "Most of them have surrendered, Robb," she reported, voice trembling. "We're gathering them in the courtyard now, the ones who are able to walk. The rest of your men are searching the corridors to round up any stragglers. I've sent a few to look for Edmure and Roslin." Robb's heart jolted. In the madness, he'd nearly forgotten about his uncle and the bride. "Are they safe?" he asked urgently. "Did the bedding party reach the bedchamber?" Catelyn pressed a hand to her brow. "From what I've learned, yes. The women took Edmure one way, the men took Roslin another. They must have heard the fighting and likely barricaded themselves in a room. The corridor leading to them is still blocked, apparently by some furniture. Our men are trying to break through without harming anyone inside." "Mean?" Robb glanced around, mindful of the many tasks at hand. "Then I'll see to it. We need Edmure. And Roslin as well. She might become an important piece in dealing with the Freys." He tried to keep his voice calm, but each new piece of chaos tested the composure he'd been fighting to maintain all day. Catelyn nodded, her eyes haunted by the carnage surrounding them. Before Robb left, she caught his arm. "We've taken Walder Frey prisoner, but there are so many of his sons and grandsons. They outnumber us if they had all been here. But we planned for that, didn't we?" Robb gave a grim nod. "We did. Many of their fighting men are away or posted in the other tower. By the time they gather, we'll have control of the castle and be ready for them. Still, keep an eye on Bolton and any of his men. I don't fully trust him." With that, Robb hurried off, stepping over broken shields and dropped weapons. A pair of Stark guards guided him through a back corridor, which was dimly lit by sconces. Blood spatters trailed along the flagstones, leading to a heavy wooden door set into the wall. On the other side came muffled voices, urgent and anxious. "Your Grace," said one guard, "they're in there. We can hear them, but the door's barricaded." Robb raised a fist and rapped on the wood. "Edmure," he called. "It's Robb. Are you in there?" For a moment, there was only silence. Then a muffled reply, "Hey, I'm here." Edmure's voice was strained. "I'm with Roslin and others. Is it safe to come out?" Robb breathed a partial sigh of relief. "Yes, we've taken the hall, but open the door so we can be certain you're all right." A scraping sound followed, then the crash of furniture being moved aside. Slowly, the door creaked open, revealing a small storeroom lit by a single, flickering lantern. Edmure stood in the threshold, shirt half torn away from the rowdy bedding tradition, but otherwise unhurt. Behind him, Roslin hovered in a corner, clutching the remnants of her gown around her shoulders. A handful of Frey women and Tully men were also crammed inside, all looking shaken. Edmure's eyes flicked over Robb's armor, noticing the bloodstains, and his face paled. "Seven save us," he muttered. "What happened out there? Is the wedding undone?" Robb motioned for the group to come out. "It's safe enough for now, but we need to be quick. Lord Walder tried to spring a trap on us. We countered first, and fighting broke out. The feast is ended, and many have died." He couldn't keep the heaviness from his tone. "But you and Roslin are both alive, which is a blessing. We'll see that you're protected." Roslin stepped forward, looking as though she might faint. Her lips trembled. "My father? My brothers?" Robb hesitated, uncertain how to answer. The truth was stark. Her father was now a prisoner, battered and gagged. As for her brothers, several might be among the dead or captured. But the young bride's eyes were so frightened, so lost. "Lord Walder is alive," he said evenly. "He's in our custody. He made his choice to raise arms against us." "Merci." Roslin nodded slowly, tears sliding down her cheeks. She looked back at Edmure, who slipped an arm around her shoulders in a gentle gesture of comfort. Robb felt a pang. This union was meant to repair the broken alliance. Instead, it had become a battlefield. Even if they succeeded, the Tully-Frey bond would be stained by blood. Quietly, Robb gestured for the Tully men and the few Frey women to move out of the storeroom. "We'll take you to a safer part of the keep," he said. "Stay together. Guard them well," he told the pair of Stark guards at his side. "Keep any harm from coming to them. We've enough bloodshed as it is." Edmure caught Robb's arm before they parted. "Is there truly no chance of a peaceable resolution now?" His voice was hollow, as though the reality was settling on him in a rush. "I wanted to make amends with the Freys, cleanly for the sake of the war, but I see that's impossible." Robb's expression hardened. Lord Walder and those loyal to him made a choice. They refused to let the slight go. "You saw how they planned to attack us during the feast. We did what we had to. Perhaps, when the dust settles, we can salvage some measure of peace, but not under Walder Frey's terms." "Naturus." Edmure pressed his lips together, glancing at Roslin, who was being helped by one of her cousins. "I see," he murmured. Then he straightened, squaring his shoulders in a show of determination. "I'm with you, Your Grace. I'll do whatever is needed to end this. But Roslin, she's an innocent in all this." "We'll protect her," Robb said firmly, forcing gentleness into his voice. "Don't worry about that. Now go." Edmure joined his bride. The group followed the guards down the corridor, their footsteps echoing. Robb turned away, heading back toward the main hall. He could hear a distant rumble of men barking orders, the clank of chains, the whimpers of captives being gathered. The trap had indeed turned the tide in Robb's favor, but that did not erase the gruesome aftermath. He emerged into the hall to find the Great John towering over 3 captured Frey men, who knelt on the floor with their heads bowed. Each looked up with sullen or fearful eyes. The Great John was clearly questioning them, or perhaps just barking threats. Bolton lingered nearby, arms folded, face unreadable. Robb joined them, scanning the hall. How many dead? Dozens at least. The cost to both sides was high, and this was only one branch of the Frey family. Countless others might be outside these walls, or in the second tower, or off in the riverlands. He inhaled through his nose, telling himself to remain focused. The immediate threat was contained, but the finishing moves were yet to be made. One of the captured Frey men, a middle-aged cousin with a greasy mustache, lifted his head. "Will you kill us, Your Grace?" he asked, voice shaking. "We had no choice. Lord Walder commanded us. If we refused, he would punish us." Robb studied him, noticing how sweat beaded on his temples. "Stand," Robb ordered quietly. The man rose unsteadily. "I'm no butcher. Surrender, and you'll be treated as prisoners of war. But if you resist or try to kill my men, you'll die. Is that clear?" The Frey nodded rapidly, tears pricking his eyes. The other 2 followed suit, bowing their heads in supplication. The Great John looked disappointed there would be no more fight. He spat on the floor in disgust. "Cowards." Bolton stepped closer, voice gliding like cold silk. "Your Grace, we've assembled the captured Freys in the courtyard. Shall we have them placed in the dungeons, or would you prefer a more immediate resolution?" Robb stiffened, reading the implication in Bolton's question. An offer to slaughter them under the guise of ensuring no further threat, and perhaps a desire to see blood spilled, for the sake of intimidation. Robb would not have it. "They go to the dungeons," he replied. "We'll question them later if need be. For now, chain them and keep a close watch. Then gather the wounded. It's time we tended to the living, our own men included." Another. Bolton inclined his head. "As you wish. Though I'd caution that certain families might prefer a final statement, rather than show mercy than these traitors deserve." Robb's eyes narrowed. "We are not butchers. The North remembers that, and so do I. He refused to yield on this point. See it done. Bolton offered a slim smile. Very well. With that, he moved off. Robb tracked him with his gaze until the pale man vanished into the corridor, the swirl of his cloak trailing behind. Then Robb turned, wanting to see for himself what the courtyard looked like now. The great Jinfelin stepped beside him, silent for once. They passed through a pair of battered doors into the cool light of the courtyard. The sun was obscured by a thick bank of clouds, giving the entire space a grim cast. Puddles of muddy water gleamed where earlier rain had collected. Stark guards clustered around a large group of Frey prisoners, many with heads bowed. Some had fresh cuts or bruises, others trembled in shock. Over a dozen Stark men stood watch, crossbows and spears at the ready. To the left, Grey Wind paced at the edge of a makeshift pen, where a handful of horses were corralled. The direwolf bristled upon seeing Robb, stepping forward to greet him with a low rumble. Robb knelt and buried his fingers in the thick fur at the wolf's neck, drawing in a breath of relief. "You're a good boy," he murmured. Grey Wind had been excluded from the hall earlier, but he could sense the violence within and had likely torn apart any Frey who tried to escape that way. A few yards away, a tall gallows-like structure jutted from the ramparts, used previously by Walder Frey for punishing disobedient underlings. Robb saw a row of sharpened spikes near the top, each presumably intended for heads or bodies. The sight churned his stomach. This had been a place of cruelty long before they arrived. He wondered if it would see more cruelty today. Near the center of the courtyard, a cluster of wounded men, both Stark and Frey, were laid out on blankets or straw. Some groaned, some were silent, their eyes glassy. A few of Robb's soldiers did what they could to bandage wounds, but they had limited supplies. Robb spotted a couple of men who had once served as field medics in his army, now hastily preparing salves and rudimentary splints. He felt gratitude and sorrow all at once. The cost of war was never easy to bear. He made his way among them, kneeling to speak with a Stark soldier who clutched a bleeding arm. The soldier tried to rise in respect, but Robb gently pushed him back down. "Rest," Robb said softly. "We'll get help. Thank you for fighting." The man's eyes shone with pained pride. Then Robb turned to a groaning Frey who was missing part of his ear. The man stared up with terror. "Help me," he rasped, pressing a rag to the side of his head. Blood seeped through the cloth. Robb crouched beside him. "If you surrender, you'll be treated," he said, trying to keep his voice calm. "Do you yield?" The Frey nodded weakly, tears mingling with sweat on his face. "I do," he croaked. "I yield." Robb signaled one of his medics. The young man hurried over, kneeling to attend to the injured Frey. Robb rose, heart heavy. He never wanted to be so accustomed to violence that he could simply ignore a wounded man's suffering. He swore to maintain a modicum of mercy, even here. "Your Grace," a voice called. Robb turned to see one of his officers approaching at a brisk pace. The man bowed. "We've had word from the second tower. Lord Walder's sons and grandsons there have barricaded the drawbridge connecting the towers. Our men are outside the gates. They'll hold if we approach, but they won't attack unless commanded. Shall we try to storm the tower or starve them out?" Robb ran a hand through his hair, strands sticking to his damp forehead. The second tower was a known stronghold. If enough Freys had retreated there, they could withstand a siege for a while. But it might not even come to that if Walder Frey were forced to command their surrender. That was the key advantage of keeping the old man alive. "Give me a moment," Robb said, heading back toward the keep. He passed through another archway, stepping carefully over rubble and more bodies. Inside, a small antechamber led to the place where Walder Frey had been chained. A gaggle of Stark soldiers stood guard, the old lord still shackled by the wrists to the iron ring. He glared at them, drool dribbling from the side of his mouth around the gag. When Robb entered, the guards snapped to attention. Robb approached slowly, feeling Walder's wild stare on him. The old man tried to speak, but only muffled sounds emerged. Robb nodded to a guard. "Remove the gag," he ordered. "But be ready if he tries anything foolish." The guard plucked the rag from Walder's mouth. The old man coughed, spat, and wheezed. For a moment, he said nothing, just glared at Robb with eyes full of unbridled hatred. At last his voice came out in a rasp. "My men will cut you down. You've only taken half my castle." Robb regarded him with cold composure. "You were beaten," he said evenly. "Your men in the great hall and the courtyard have surrendered. I have your bride's father in chains, and your precious towers are being surrounded. I offer you a chance to spare what remains of your house. Command your sons to yield the second tower. Now." Walder Frey bared his teeth. "Never. You've spilled Frey blood. You violated guest right. We violated no guest right," Robb snapped, anger flaring. "You intended treachery. Don't forget the crossbows hidden in the gallery. My men found them, loaded, aimed at us. You planned this betrayal. We only struck first." Walder's face twitched with rage. "You swore an oath to marry one of my daughters, Stark. You broke it. I paid a price. Edmure wed Roslin. That was the agreement. And you plan to kill us anyway, oath or no oath." Robb leveled a searing glare. "All your talk about oaths is empty when you yourself have no honor." Walder sneered, straining against his shackles. "I'll never forgive that insult." Robb drew a short dagger from his belt, brandishing it inches from Walder's face. The old man's eyes flickered with a hint of fear. "Listen to me," Robb growled. "We can do this the easy way or the hard way. Order the men in the second tower to stand down. If you refuse, I'll have your tongue cut out so you can't incite them. Then I'll offer them terms myself. Think carefully, old man." "Then be." Walder glared, sweat trickling down his lined brow. His voice trembled with bitterness. "You think me afraid to die? I've lived a long life, seen more winters than you can count. If you think that threat will bend me, you're a bigger fool than your father ever was." Robb's jaw clenched. He was tempted to slice the old man's throat right then, to end his vile presence. Yet his mother's counsel echoed in his mind. Walder Frey was still leverage. Even if the old man refused to yield, the threat of his life might persuade his sons. Robb lowered the dagger slightly and turned to the guards. "Take him out to the courtyard, keep him in chains. Let every Frey who looks out from the tower see him at our mercy." Walder spat at Robb's feet. "The gods will judge you for this, boy." Robb ignored the venom. The guards seized Walder, hauling him upright, dragging him toward the courtyard. A commotion stirred among the Frey prisoners, who craned their necks to watch their patriarch. Some cried out in dismay at seeing their lord in chains, face bloody and bruised. Others simply stared, pale with shock. Robb stepped forward, raising his voice so it would carry across the courtyard. "Men of House Frey, look upon your lord and see that the game is ended. Your patriarch is our prisoner. Your main tower has fallen, and many of your kin have surrendered. The second tower will not rescue you. If you wish to live, throw down your arms and submit. We do not desire more bloodshed, but if you force our hand, we will take the tower by storm. We will take the tower by storm." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "Now is your chance. Lay down your arms. All who surrender will be made prisoners of war, but they will be spared. Resist, and we will answer with steel." Across the open yard, on the far ramparts, a few figures peered down. Robb could see them shifting in agitation. Perhaps Walder's sons or grandsons, trying to decide whether to fight on. He lifted his dagger, pressing it lightly to Walder's throat, though not enough to cut. The old man cursed and thrashed, but the guards held him firm. "For the last time, yield," Robb called, "or watch your father die." A hush enveloped the courtyard, as if everyone held their breath. Walder's face twisted with fury, but a flicker of desperation shone in his eyes. Robb could sense that the old man was truly afraid now. He might welcome death personally, but he also knew that if he died, his family's position would collapse, and the second tower defenders might lose hope. A shout echoed from the ramparts. "Wait!" A man appeared, older than some, perhaps one of Walder's elder sons. He had the distinctive narrow Frey face, though slightly less wrinkled. He lifted a hand. "Don't harm him. We'll we'll come down to talk." "And?" Robb nodded, relieved to see at least one voice of reason. "Very well. Order your men to stand down. Open the gate, throw out your weapons, then come forward." A moment of nervous tension passed before the man shouted again. "We will. But you must swear you'll not kill us in cold blood once we surrender." Robb raised his voice. "I swear it on my honor as king in the north. Surrender peacefully, and you'll be taken as prisoners, treated according to the customs of war. But if you resist or attempt any treachery, your father dies." Another pause. Then the man disappeared from the rampart. There followed the muffled sounds of scuffling, as though some argued behind the walls. Finally, a rusty groan signaled the slow opening of the gate, bridging the second tower. A group of Frey men began to shuffle out, unarmed, some with heads bowed. They carried a white cloth on a spear as a makeshift flag of truce. The courtyard guards tensed, weapons half raised, uncertain if this was a ruse. But as the Freys drew near, it became clear they had indeed chosen surrender. Men in chainmail tossed their swords, spears, and crossbows onto the ground, raising their hands in surrender. They did so in small clusters, eyes darting fearfully between Robb and Walder. Robb signaled his men to move in and secure the prisoners, binding their wrists with rope. Guards quickly scooped up the discarded weapons. A few of the Freys tried to protest, claiming they had never wanted to fight. But it made no difference. They were all disarmed now. The tower was effectively under Stark control. The courtyard seethed with tension as the entire family realized the depth of their defeat. Walder Frey, pinned in chains, was forced to watch. Some of his kin cursed Robb or spat at the ground. Others simply wept. Robb kept his expression grim, refusing to relish the scene. This was a necessary outcome, but not a joyous one. Countless men had died so that the Starks could wrest the advantage from a treacherous lord who had planned to annihilate them. At length, Roose Bolton reappeared, flanked by several of his own men with flayed man sigils on their tunics. He surveyed the courtyard, lips curving in a faint, inscrutable smile. "Congratulations, Your Grace," he said softly. "The fortress is yours." Robb offered a curt nod. He felt no sense of triumph, only relief that the worst was over. "See to it that the castle is fully secured," he told Bolton and the Greyjohn, who had appeared at his other side. "Post guards on every gate, every corridor. Ensure no one sneaks out, not even a child. We'll sort them out later, but we can't have anyone slipping away to rally more forces." The Greyjohn pounded his chest. "Aye, we'll keep this place locked down tight as the Dreadfort's dungeons." He gave Bolton a challenging look, as though referencing the rumors of that grim fortress. Bolton's lips twitched at the comparison, but did not reply. Meanwhile, Robb's gaze lingered on Walder Frey. The man sagged in the guard's grip, apparently exhausted. He stared at his family members, who were being herded into lines. Some glared back at him, resentment or confusion on their faces. Walder's grandchildren might blame him for leading them into this debacle. For all the old man's cunning, he had underestimated the North's resolve. Robb took a step closer, lowering his voice. "You see now that your betrayal has failed. You gambled everything on your trap and you lost." Walder Frey drew in a ragged breath. "Pa," he croaked, voice feeble. "You've made an enemy of House Frey that will last generations. One day you'll regret not killing us all." Robb felt a swell of anger. "Perhaps," he said quietly. "But I won't slaughter helpless prisoners. That's the difference between you and me." He turned away, leaving the old man to stew in his broken pride. All around, Stark soldiers began marching the Frey captives inside, hauling them toward the dungeons or any secure chambers that could serve as makeshift cells. The sound of scraping feet and clanking chains became a grim chorus. Overhead, the clouds began to thin, letting through pale rays of afternoon sun. Robb realized with weary surprise that it was still day. It felt like an eternity had passed in these blood-soaked hours. He found his mother standing near the steps to the great hall, arms wrapped around herself as though trying to ward off a chill. The weariness in her expression mirrored his own. When he approached, she looked at him, lips parted in relief. Without words, she embraced him, pressing her cheek to his battered armor. He let himself sink into the comfort of that moment, remembering he was still her son, and that no matter how heavy the crown on his head, he had family who cared. Then she drew back, eyes searching his. "Is it done?" she asked softly. He swallowed. "Yes. The keep is ours. The second tower has surrendered." "It's done, Mother. We've won." "Dad?" She nodded, exhaling a trembling breath. "And the cost?" Robb's throat tightened. "High," he admitted. "We'll know the exact toll soon. We lost good men, but we thwarted a massacre that might have claimed us all. If the Freys had managed their own trap, we'd be lying in pools of our own blood." Catelyn swallowed hard. She glanced around at the courtyard and the keep. "And what now? Will you hold the twins yourself or install a garrison, or—" Robb grimaced. "I'll likely leave some loyal men here to keep watch on the Freys. We can't risk letting them regain power. As for Walder Frey, I'll decide whether to take him back to Riverrun as a hostage, or keep him under lock and key here, at his own seat. He might be more dangerous in his own territory, but is also a statement. A reminder of who truly holds power now." She folded her arms, nodding slowly. "A wise precaution. This seat controls the crossing. It's vital to the war effort. The Freys can't be allowed to undermine our position again." A flicker of motion caught Robb's eye. Edmure and Roslin stood at the edge of the courtyard, flanked by a few Tully men. Roslin gazed around with red-rimmed eyes, horror etched on her face. Edmure's arm was firmly around her waist as if to shield her from the sight. Robb felt a pang of pity for them both. Their union was supposed to heal a rift, not soak the twins in blood. He took his mother's hand and led her toward Edmure and Roslin. The bride turned her anguished gaze to Robb, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. "You have him, my father," she whispered, glancing at the old man chained in the distance. What will you do with him?" Edmure added softly. "She's frightened, Robb. This has all been a terrible shock." Robb steadied himself. "I know. I'm sorry it came to this. Your father gave us no choice. If we hadn't acted first, we'd be dead." Roslin sobbed quietly, lowering her face. Edmure stroked her hair, murmuring comforting words. Robb tried to convey sympathy without relinquishing his position. "He'll remain a prisoner for now, until I decide otherwise. You're free to see him if it can be done safely, but understand that he committed treachery." "She." Roslin said nothing, only drew closer to Edmure as if seeking refuge. Edmure nodded, sorrow tightening his features. "I understand. I only hope in time we can find some path to peace. For Roslin's sake, if nothing else." Robb gently clasped his uncle's shoulder. "I don't wish to punish innocents for one man's plot. Roslin is Lady Tully now. She's under our protection." He turned to her. "No harm will come to you, my lady. That I promise." "Nee." She offered him a trembling nod, glancing again at the battered figures, the casualties of this day's battle. Robb knew it would take more than words to soothe such wounds. Perhaps only time could. He excused himself, stepping away to direct his men. Evening shadows began lengthening across the courtyard. Flames flickered in torches as the sun dipped behind the outer walls. The stench of death lingered, though soldiers had begun the grim task of collecting bodies. Some Frey prisoners sat on the cold ground, heads bowed, while guards held pikes at the ready. Now and then, someone sobbed or cursed, but for the most part, a somber silence stretched over the twins like a burial shroud. Robb, exhausted, finally found a moment to pause at the well in the corner of the yard. He lowered a bucket, drawing up cold water. Splashing it over his face, he felt the stickiness of dried blood on his cheek, though he wasn't sure if it was his or someone else. The water stunned the shallow cuts along his arms. He inhaled, letting the frigid sensation ground him in the present. He couldn't forget that there was still a war to fight beyond these castle walls. The Lannisters, the Ironborn, the uncertain loyalty of certain river lords, none of that had vanished just because he'd survived Walder Frey's treachery. Yet, for this one moment at least, they had turned the tables. The Red Wedding, as it might have been, had not come to pass. Instead, the Freys had stumbled into their own snare, and Robb Stark remained the young wolf, undefeated in open battle, and now victorious in the Twins. He wondered if that would be enough to rally the rest of the Riverlands and the North under his banner. Or would his new reputation as a king who sets traps overshadow the Stark name's legacy of honor? He thought of his father's face, that quiet strength, the unflinching sense of right and wrong. Ned Stark would never have wanted this. An ambush at a wedding feast, a cunning infiltration of a potential ally's seat. But Robb tried to remind himself that these were desperate times. The Lannisters had murdered his father under the guise of justice. The Freys would have butchered them under the guise of a wedding. Honor, in such a world, needed cunning to survive. One of his men called out to him, breaking his reverie. "Your Grace, we're taking the bodies to the lower bailey. Do you have any commands for how they should be interred?" Robb straightened. "Separate our dead from the Freys. Our own will send north if their families wish it, or bury them with honor in the Riverlands. The Freys can bury their kin in their own crypts if they choose. Let it not be said we showed disrespect to the dead." "Yes, Your Grace." The soldier hurried off, and Robb stared after him, weariness settling into his bones. He wished he could rest, simply collapse in a bed, and sleep the horrors away. But there was still too much to do. He needed to plan what would come next, how to utilize the Twins as a secure crossing, how to handle the threat of reprisal from other Frey branches scattered across Westeros. The name Frey extended beyond these walls. The old man had sired so many children, and half of them were married into other houses. News of this night's events would ripple far and wide. Setting his shoulders, Robb turned toward the looming towers. He caught sight of Grey Wind pacing near a cluster of guards, sniffing the air. The direwolf's golden eyes locked with Robb's, a silent expression of loyalty and watchfulness. That gave Robb a glimmer of reassurance. No matter how dark things grew, at least he had his pack. When he entered the keep again, he passed by the makeshift prison area. Walder Frey had been chained to a pillar, under close watch, presumably to prevent him from rallying any hidden reserves. The old man huddled in the fading light, face twisted with impotent rage. Every so often, he would tug at the chains, as if to test for weakness. None was apparent. Robb considered stopping to speak with him, but some deeper sense of mercy told him there was no point in further torment. Walder Frey was beaten, and no conversation would change that. Instead, Robb ascended a set of spiral stairs leading to the Lord's private solar. Two of his guards had already forced the door open and stood at attention. The solar itself was a small, stuffy chamber cluttered with Lord Walder's personal effects. Ledgers, letters, small chests of coin, a few pieces of battered furniture, and the faint smell of rancid old meat. Robb wrinkled his nose. He settled into the one decent chair, scanning the scattering of parchment on a table. Many were scribbled accounts of debts, betrothals, and genealogies of Frey lineage. One letter caught his eye, bearing the faded seal of House Lannister. He picked it up, heart pounding as he skimmed the contents. Nothing too explicit. Some polite words referencing a potential alliance, but it hinted at communication between Walder Frey and Tywin Lannister's camp. Betrayal indeed. He pressed the letter flat, letting out a slow breath. If Walder had succeeded tonight, he might have brought the Stark cause to ruin for the price of a Lannister favor. Instead, the old man now sat in chains in his own courtyard, living proof that cunning alone was not enough to triumph when facing an enemy prepared to be equally cunning in turn. Footsteps approached from behind. Robb turned, finding his mother entering, her face etched with concern. She set a hand on the back of the chair. "You're bleeding," she murmured, touching a spot on his arm. He glanced down, noticing a shallow slice on his bicep. The cut had bled through the fabric of his tunic, though he hadn't really felt it in the heat of battle. "It's nothing," he said, voice subdued. "I'll let the medics see to it once we have order. How are you faring?" She shook her head, glancing at the disordered solar. "Tired. And Edmure. I'm shocked. Grateful you're alive. Grateful our men prevailed. But heartsick at what this wedding has become." "Monday." Robb nodded. "I know," he said gently. "I feel it too." Outside, the last vestiges of sunlight slipped below the horizon, leaving only the dim glow of torches and the faint light of early stars. The twins were silent, save for the groans of the wounded and the hushed movements of soldiers patrolling the halls. Robb felt the weight of the moment pressing on him. A sense that though they had defied one great treachery, many more perils lay ahead. He rose from the chair, crossing to the narrow window slit. Peering out, he could see the walkway connecting the two towers, and beyond that, the dark stretch of the river. Somewhere in the distance, a raven croaked. A fine haze drifted along the water, half concealing the reflection of torchlights. His mother came to stand beside him. After a moment of shared silence, she said, "Your father would be proud that you protected our family, but he would mourn the path forced upon us." Robb swallowed, feeling an ache rise in his chest. I know." She laid a hand on his shoulder, gazing out at the same river. "We must remain strong. The war isn't over. The Lannisters still hold the Iron Throne, and the North remains under threat. At least this crossing is secured." "No." Robb nodded. "Secured for now. Walder's brood might cause trouble once word spreads, but we'll deal with that when it comes." He paused, voice dropping to a murmur. "We've a long road ahead, but at least we're still on it." They stayed by the window a while longer, letting the hush of night settle over them. The flicker of torches in the courtyard below reminded Robb of the cost of war. Men who once laughed and ate together, now lying in silent rows. He wondered if he would see the end of it. Yet the thought of the North, of Winterfell, of his people, gave him the resolve to keep going. At length, he turned from the window. "Come, Mother," he said softly. "We'll see if there's a spot where we can rest. Tomorrow we'll make our next plans. For now, let us tend to our wounded, bury our dead, and hold this castle for the North." She nodded, following him out of the solar and into the corridor lit by flickering lanterns. He would not sleep easily. Memories of screaming men and echoing steel would haunt him. But he could at least close his eyes knowing that House Stark had faced the snare of the twins and emerged with teeth bared. The Red Wedding had become the Frey's doom instead of the Starks. And in the morning, the king in the North would rise again, determined to finish what he had begun. Robb Stark did not sleep. Long after he and Catelyn withdrew from the solar, he remained in a small bedchamber that the Freys had once reserved for visiting lords. The walls were draped in faded banners depicting the two gray towers of House Frey, while a narrow window allowed only a meager view of the courtyard. Across the room, Grey Wind lay sprawled on the stone floor, ears pricked, alert even in rest. A single candle burned, casting unsteady shadows as Robb sat on the edge of the bed, elbows on his knees, face in his hands. Even with the chain of events under his control, a deep heaviness suffused his soul. He had triumphed, but only by resorting to subterfuge at a wedding, a place once sacred under the guest rite. The memory of it all, the tension in the feast hall, the frantic clash of steel, Walder Frey's bitter snarls, raced through Robb's mind in relentless loops. Over and over, he saw the fear in Roslin's eyes, the shock on Edmure's face, the wounded men gasping for air in the courtyard. Although he had spared the majority of the Freys who laid down their arms, the presence of so much blood and death within these walls haunted him. He felt no triumphant glory, only a cold and relentless exhaustion. A faint noise drifted in from the corridor. Robb lifted his head, reaching automatically for the sword propped against the bedside trunk. It was a habit he might never shake, even in the presence of relative safety. The door creaked open just enough to let a figure slip through. Robb caught the flicker of a candle's light dancing on auburn hair. Catelyn Stark stepped in, quietly shutting the door. She wore a thick robe over her clothes, a shawl draped around her shoulders, and her weary eyes found his immediately. "I thought you might still be awake," she said softly, holding the candle. "The corridors are quieter now. Most of your men are asleep or on guard. Some of the Frey women are tending to the wounded under supervision." She paused, letting the unspoken linger in the hush. "I saw the way you looked earlier. Are you all right?" Robb exhaled slowly. "I don't know. I can't shake this feeling." He gestured to the torn tunic he still wore, stiff with dried blood. "It's as if I can't wash it away. No matter how many times I try to think of the necessity, I still feel unclean." She came closer, setting the candle on a small table near a battered armchair. The faint glow revealed the lines of worry etched on her face. "War does this, Robb," she whispered, pressing a hand to his shoulder. "You fought to protect our family, but these are dangerous waters. Men have done far worse in the name of preserving their house." He gave a nod, though it offered little comfort. "I know. Part of me is relieved we struck first. If we had fallen for Walder Frey's deception, our entire cause would have died in that hall. The North would have lost its king, and the Lannisters would soon have marched north, unstoppable. But I can't celebrate it." His eyes darted to Grey Wind, who stirred, ears twitching at the soft voices. The direwolf lay his broad head on his paws, watchful. Catelyn reached into a pouch at her waist. She pulled out a small flask. "I found this in the kitchens. Some meager wine. It's nothing like the arbor gold they served at the wedding feast, but I thought perhaps it would help soothe the mind." She handed it to him. He took a swig, wincing at the bitterness. "Thank you," he said, handing it back. She followed suit, grimacing at the taste. "I remember Father would sometimes have a cup of mulled wine to ease his thoughts, especially after hearing difficult news." She nodded in memory, then sat beside Robb, letting silence enfold them. Through the small window slit, the faint night sky was heavy with low-hanging clouds, obscuring the moon. It felt as though the entire world were wrapped in darkness, suspended between storms. Robb found himself dwelling on the myriad tasks ahead. Securing the twins was only the beginning. The war with the Lannisters raged on. Riverrun still needed to be protected, and the Ironborn had invaded the north. "How soon do we move on?" Catelyn asked quietly, echoing his concerns. "Or do we remain here until the Freys are fully subdued?" Robb grimaced, massaging the tightness in his temples. "I'll need to leave a strong garrison. There are too many Freys scattered about, and the moment we show weakness, they'll attempt something. But I can't stay here indefinitely. We still need to fight for the North's independence. Tywin Lannister will learn of this eventually. He won't sit idle." "Dunno." Catelyn's gaze shifted to the door, as though she imagined Tywin's forces marching through it that instant. "Do you have the men to hold both towers?" she asked. He considered. "We lost some good soldiers in the fighting, but a portion of the Frey forces might be turned to our side if we handle them well. Most are battered and resentful of Walder. They might not love me, but if given the choice between captivity or vassal service, some might prefer to keep their lives and lands. If we can incorporate them into our garrison, watch them carefully." He trailed off, uncertain. "It's a gamble. And you'd need a reliable commander," she noted. "Someone you trust beyond doubt. To lead that garrison, manage the Freys, and maintain order." "Yes." Robb leaned forward, bracing his elbows on his thighs again. Names flitted through his mind. The great John Bolton, other northern lords like Rickard Karstark's men. Though Rickard was dead, and the Karstarks were in disarray. Roose Bolton was cunning, but trusting him was a challenge. The great John was loyal, but his temper might lead to conflict with the Freys. Then there were the lesser lords, many of whom lacked the status or skill to hold such a vital crossing. A faint knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. "Your Grace?" A muffled voice came. "It's me, Sir Reynold." Robb rose, exchanging a quick glance with his mother, then cracked the door open. Sir Reynold was a minor knight sworn to the Starks, an earnest man in his 30s with mud-splattered boots and red-rimmed eyes. He bowed stiffly. "Pardon the intrusion, but I have news. Lord Walder is demanding an audience. He's threatening to cause a stir among his people if you don't speak with him. Our men say he keeps shouting that you're violating the laws of gods and men by holding him like a common criminal." "Vampirachas." Robb's jaw tightened. "Very well," he said. "Where is he?" Sir Reynold cleared his throat. "We've moved him to a stronger cell. He tried to bribe one of the guards, so we decided to place him in the lower dungeon where he can't keep shouting from the windows." Robb snorted softly. "Of course he did." He glanced at his mother, who rose too. "Let him demand all he wants," Robb said. "But I'll go speak with him. The more we corner him, the more reckless he might get, and that could risk my men." Catelyn touched Robb's arm. "I'll come with you. I want to hear what he says. They followed Sir Reynold down the winding corridors that connected the two towers. Torches crackled, casting long shadows on damp stone walls. Now and then, they passed a group of Stark soldiers or a gathering of uneasy Frey men who lowered their eyes in submission. Many recognized Robb, though few dared speak. The hush felt ominous, like a battlefield after the final clarion call. They descended a spiral staircase, leading to the lower levels of the castle. The air turned stale and cold, and the sound of dripping water echoed off distant walls. A door reinforced with iron came into view. 2 Stark guards bearing spears stood sentry on either side, and beyond that, a corridor of cells stretched into darkness. Sir Reynold gestured for the guards to unlock the door, which they did, pushing it open with a creak. Inside, torchlight flickered in shallow sconces. The corridor stank of old straw, mold, and the acrid tang of latrines. Several small cells flanked either side, each secured by iron bars. At the very end, they saw a figure hunched on a wooden stool, chain rattling from the ring set in the wall. Walder Frey's head jerked up as they approached. 2 more Stark men stood watch, swords at their hips. Robb stopped a few paces outside the cell. Walder Frey sat upright, trying to muster the same haughtiness he'd always worn like a second skin. He wore only a threadbare tunic, his hair disheveled and thinning scalp visible, but a hint of defiance remained in his gaze. "About time," he growled. "You keep an old man waiting in a cesspit while you lounge about my halls." Robb stared, crossing his arms. "You caused the bloodshed in those halls. You have no one but yourself to blame for where you sit." He glanced at the guards, who stood at rigid attention. He asked for an audience. "Let's hear him." Walder's lips quivered with a mixture of anger and calculation. "Your men say I'm a prisoner without trial. You claim you are king in the north, yet you deny me the courtesy of a parley. Is that how the Starks do things? Locking up your host on false charges?" "Nah." Catelyn's hand tightened at her side, but she let Robb speak first. "There are no false charges. You readied crossbows at a wedding feast. You plotted to kill your guests in direct violation of guest right." Walder spat on the floor. "Guest right? You never had any intention of honoring our bargain. You used my home to spring your own trap. You were never a guest, but an assassin lying in wait." Robb took a deep breath, fighting to keep calm. "I would not have needed to do that if I hadn't known you intended to betray us. Even Lothar and Black Walder took orders from you to set the hall for slaughter." Walder's eyes flickered at the mention of his kin. He tugged at the iron band around his wrist. "I want to speak to my daughter, Roslin. She's the new Lady Tully, isn't she? I demand the right to see her, to ensure she's unharmed." Catelyn gave a soft, humorless laugh. "Unharmed? She would have been a widow before her marriage bed cooled if you'd had your way. Yet you think you can demand a father's right to see his child?" "So." Walder's face twisted with fury. "She is still my blood. You can't keep her from me." Robb pressed his lips into a thin line. "I can, and I will. Until I decide otherwise. Roslin is in no condition to endure your manipulations. She's with Edmure, safely removed from this dungeon. You'll have no contact with her until I deem it safe." Walder Frey's voice shook. "I have many sons. You can't subjugate them all. They'll come for me. The Lannisters will come for me, once they learn I kept my part of the bargain." Catelyn interjected, her tone razor sharp. "Kept your part of the bargain by preparing to butcher my son, your liege lord. You must think us fools. Don't forget, Walder Frey, that you're the one in chains." He glared at her, mouth opening and closing as if searching for a retort. Then he settled on spitting at her feet. One of the Stark guards raised a fist as if to strike him, but Robb held up a hand to stop the blow. "He's an old man," Robb murmured. "Words are the only weapon he has left." Then focusing on Walder again, he said, "You're done here. We'll feed you enough to keep you alive. You'll be allowed to speak with me if I require it, or with your daughter, if I grant permission. Beyond that, you'll remain in this cell until further notice. Resist, and you'll force my hand. Do you understand? Do you understand?" Walder's response was a guttural curse under his breath. Robb turned, motioning for Catelyn and Sir Reynold to follow. The old man's voice echoed after them, thick with hatred. "The North will bleed for this boy. You'll regret the day you crossed my threshold." Edmure. Robb ignored him, walking down the corridor, heart pounding. The threats still echoed in his mind, fueling a subtle dread. Even bound in irons, Walder Frey's malice seemed to seep through these walls, threatening to linger long after. Robb reminded himself that it was necessary, that Walder's imprisonment preserved the Starks' hold on the twins. Once outside the door, he ordered the guards to keep it locked at all times, to allow no visitors without his express approval. In the hallway above, the air felt marginally cleaner. Catelyn blew out a breath. "He won't relent," she said grimly, shaking her head. "He's too proud, too old, and too bitter." Robb rubbed the back of his neck. "Which is exactly why we need to keep him under watch. If he escapes, or if one of his family members tries to free him, everything we fought for could unravel." Sir Reynold bowed. "I'll see to it that no one enters or leaves the lower dungeon without your orders, Your Grace." Robb clapped the knight on the shoulder in gratitude. "Thank you. Now, get some rest if you can. Tomorrow will be a long day. We've so many prisoners that we need to sort out who's who." The knight offered a weary salute and departed, leaving Robb and Catelyn alone in the stairwell. Catelyn reached for her son's hand, squeezing it gently. He managed a weak smile, appreciating the warmth of that gesture. They ascended in silence, passing rows of dark, narrow windows. At one landing, Robb glimpsed a pair of his men carrying bedding and blankets into a side chamber. He recognized the older soldier as one of the veterans who'd fought beside him at Oxcross. The soldier paused to bow, then disappeared through the doorway. Robb realized that with so many men still recovering from the fight, the twins would be packed to capacity overnight. The courtyard, the towers, every corridor. Some men would have to sleep on the floors. By the time he and Catelyn reached the main level, his legs felt leaden. He turned to her. "You should try to rest, Mother. I'll be all right." She touched his cheek, eyes glistening with tired devotion. "I'll rest if you promise to do the same, at least for a short while." Robb gave a small nod, not entirely certain he could keep that promise. Sleep was elusive, and he had too much swirling in his mind. Still, he would at least lie down, if only to gather some strength. "I'll try," he said. She kissed his brow lightly, the gesture reminiscent of childhood. Then she left him with a soft murmur about returning to her chamber. Robb watched her go, shoulders sagging from the unrelenting weight. Once she'd gone, Grey Wind padded over, pressing his furry flank against Robb's thigh. Robb ruffled the direwolf's thick neck fur, taking comfort in that primal bond. He walked aimlessly for a while, passing from one corridor to another, occasionally nodding to guards who saluted. Near an archway leading to the courtyard, he paused, looking out at the night sky. Torches cast flickering halos along the walls, revealing scattered clusters of men finishing the final tasks of the day. Piling wreckage, scrubbing blood stains from stone, carrying the last of the wounded to makeshift infirmaries. Robb noticed a small group of Frey prisoners being led below, likely to join their lord in captivity. He remembered, suddenly, that Edmure and Roslin were presumably in one of the rooms set aside for them. The wedding night, an ironic phrase now, would be overshadowed by the violence that had taken place. Part of him wanted to check on them. He imagined Roslin's tears, Edmure's guilt, and the tension that might now color their new marriage. But perhaps it was best not to intrude. If they needed him, they would send word. For now, he would grant them whatever semblance of privacy they could find in this battered fortress. He moved on, eventually returning to the small bedchamber that Sir Reynold had shown him earlier. Grey Wind followed, nails clicking on the stone floor. Robb latched the door behind them, then sank onto the bed without removing his boots, letting his arms go limp at his sides. The flickering candle on the table cast dancing shadows, distorting shapes on the walls. Grey Wind settled at the foot of the bed, watchful, muzzle resting on his paws. The events of the night played again in Robb's thoughts. The cunning plan? The forced merriment? the sudden burst of violence, and the final quelling of Frey resistance. He heard echoes of men screaming, smelled the memory of blood. The guilt gnawed at him, though he knew it had been the only way to survive. But a question haunted him. Had the price been too high? At length, exhaustion overcame him. His eyelids grew heavy, and eventually his mind slipped into a fitful slumber, punctuated by jagged dreams of crossbow quarrels and the roar of a banquet-turned battlefield. He awoke hours later, his heart pounding. The candle had burned low, sputtering in its holder, leaving the room cloaked in near darkness. The first glimmer of dawn tinted the window slit with a pale gray. Robb rubbed at his eyes. Gray wind stirred, a low whine in his throat, as if sensing Robb's restlessness. He eased off the bed, rolling his stiff shoulders. Daylight had arrived, or would soon. That meant new decisions and new burdens. Before stepping out, he splashed water from a nearby pitcher onto his face, wincing at the chill. A quick glance in the battered mirror showed a haggard young man, hair disheveled, a bruise forming along his jaw. The bruise must have come from some flying debris or the pommel of an enemy's sword in the fracas. He barely remembered it happening. When he emerged into the corridor, he found the tower astir. Soldiers in stark livery carried supplies, and the occasional Frey servant scurried by. Eyes lowered, Robb recognized some of the staff from earlier glimpses. Cooks, scullions, and stable hands. Now they worked under stark watch, subdued yet relieved to be alive. None dared meet the king in the North's gaze for long. He made his way to the great hall. In daylight, the place appeared almost unrecognizable from the carnage of the night before. Corpses had been removed, though dark stains on the floor hinted at the blood spilled. Tables had been righted, benches set back in place. A handful of stark men ate a quick meal of bread and salted pork. They rose upon seeing Robb approach, offering respectful bows or salutes. One of the men, a short, barrel-chested sergeant named Alaric, stepped forward. "Your Grace," he said, "we've done our best to clean up. We've also begun drafting lists of the captured Freys, the wounded, the dead. I have a preliminary count if you want it." Robb took a breath, steeling himself. "Let's hear it." Alaric lowered his voice. "We lost about 50 men altogether. Northern Riverlanders, some outriders. More wounded, some gravely. The Freys lost around 150 or more. Many surrendered, so the final tally might be higher once we know which are missing or died of wounds. We've got about 200 Freys imprisoned between the dungeon and a few storerooms we converted into cells." "Man." Robb closed his eyes for a moment. So many dead. He reminded himself that it could have been far worse had Walder succeeded. Still, each life weighed on him. "Thank you," he said softly. "Pass the word that we'll bury our dead properly with all the rites. For the Freys, let them bury their own if they choose. If not, we'll see to it ourselves. The rest remain in custody." Alaric nodded. "Aye, Your Grace. Another thing. Some of the Frey lords, the older ones who survived, are requesting an audience. They claim they had no part in Walder's scheme and want to bargain for their release." Robb mulled that over. "I'll speak to them soon, but not all at once. Bring them to me in small groups, under guard. They can plead their cases. If any have proof of neutrality, I'll consider leniency. Otherwise, they stay in chains." "Yes, Your Grace." Alaric gave a curt bow, then returned to his men, issuing orders. Robb stood in the center of the great hall, letting his gaze wander over the scorched tapestries, the half-broken chairs. A hush blanketed the space, as though the ghost of that ill-fated feast lingered. Moments later, the Great John arrived, striding in with his usual vigor, armor clanking. He looked none the worse for wear, aside from a large bruise on his forehead. Spotting Robb, he let out a booming laugh. "Your Grace, there you are. I was searching every corridor. Gods, what a night, eh?" He shook his head, the memory evidently fueling his adrenaline. "Never seen a wedding feast quite like it." Robb gave a wry half-smile. "Let's hope it's the last. Did you get any rest?" "A bit, once the men had settled in." I ended up bunking in a corner of the courtyard, near the stable. The air's fresher out there than these damn corridors. He rolled a shoulder. What about you? You look half dead. Robb only shrugged. I'll manage. Then he gestured for the Great John to walk with him. We need to discuss the garrison. I intend to leave a good number of men here to ensure the Freys don't rise again. Someone has to command them. Someone I trust. Then, the Great John's eyes lit with a spark of pride. Are you asking me, Your Grace? I'd be honored, though I might go mad locked in these damp towers. I'd rather be in the field, but if you command it, I'll hold the twins until the others walk. Robb considered the big man. Loyal, brave, but also prone to impulsive actions when insulted. The phrase might easily provoke him. Still, the Great John had unwavering devotion to House Stark. He wouldn't betray them. That trust was precious in these times. You'd be my first choice. Robb began carefully. Though I do worry about the day-to-day dealings with these Freys. They might test your temper. The Great John let out a rumbling chuckle. Then I'll test their heads. You know me, I won't suffer traitors. But if that's a problem, name someone else, and I'll serve them. Robb shook his head. No. If you'll accept the post, I'd prefer you. You're my bannerman. The men trust you, and the Freys will fear you. We can assign more tempered sub-commanders to handle the daily matters. Does that suit you? Never. It suits me well enough. The Great John's grin widened. I'll keep them in line. Good. Robb nodded. I'll have official orders drawn up. We'll also station some Riverland lords here to help, like the Mallisters or the Blackwoods. That should balance the presence of purely northern men. He paused, recalling the precarious relationships among the Riverlords. Still, I want you to remain absolutely alert. If the Freys try anything cunning, or if an outside force attempts to retake the castle, send a raven at once. The Great John nodded vigorously. Understood, Your Grace. They won't surprise me. Let them try. He thumped his chest. Is that all? Robb glanced around. For now, yes. I'll want to see that old letter from Tywin Lannister discovered in Walder's solar. I suspect there's more. We should search thoroughly for any other correspondences. If Walder had deeper ties with the Lannisters, we must know. I'll order men to turn every chamber inside out. The Great John gave a parting salute and strode off to begin the day's tasks. Robb released a slow breath. Having the Great John in command might keep the Freys cowed, but it could also spark friction if they tried to needle him with insults. Then again, fear might be precisely what House Frey needed to keep them from rebellion. Robb resolved to keep an eye on the situation once he departed. He turned and saw Roose Bolton entering the hall, his posture erect, face perpetually unreadable. The pale man had changed from his blood-splattered attire into a fresh doublet of dark gray, pinned with the sigil of the flayed man. He approached in that silent, almost ghostly manner. Your Grace, Bolton said in his quiet voice. Word spread swiftly. Some of your outriders returning from patrol mentioned that travelers have already begun whispering about the altered wedding. Robb eyed him warily. It was inevitable. What of the Lannister movements? Any sign of their forces drawing near? Bolton shook his head. Not yet. They might be too occupied in the west, or regrouping around Harrenhal. Though I wouldn't underestimate Lord Tywin's capacity to respond quickly. He has eyes and ears everywhere. Robb nodded, trying to stifle a flicker of anxiety. Then we must prepare for retaliation, or at least a political blow. I doubt Tywin Lannister will weep for Walder Frey. But if the old man had made a deal with them, they'll not want to see it destroyed. Bolton inclined his head. You'll keep the Frey patriarch as a hostage, I presume. Might I suggest that if you do decide to move him elsewhere, I could arrange his secure transfer to the Dreadfort? My men are quite adept at handling difficult captives. Robb felt a chill at that offer. The very idea of Walder Frey in Roose Bolton's personal dungeon seemed like a fate overshadowed by rumors of flaying and sadism. While Walder was undoubtedly a vile man, Robb couldn't imagine delivering him to the Dreadfort. That won't be necessary, he answered curtly. He stays here for now in the Twins. The Great John will guard him. If I move him at all, I'd take him to River Run or Moat Catelyn. Somewhere I can watch him myself." Bolton bowed his head in a gesture of acquiescence. "As you will, your grace. If you have no other commands for me, I'll see to my men. We're quartered in the West Tower." "Messer." "That's fine," Robb said. "Keep me informed of anything suspicious. We're not out of danger yet." With a cool nod, Bolton stepped back and disappeared. Robb exhaled slowly, feeling once more the weight of having allies he did not entirely trust. Bolton had proved himself cunning in the past. So had Walder Frey. He wondered if that was what this war would come down to. Cunning lords plotting in the shadows, each seeking advantage. How had it all become so twisted from the honorable ways Ned Stark had taught him? His stomach rumbled, reminding him that he had not eaten since the night before, and even then, he'd hardly touched the feast. He crossed to a side table where a few loaves of bread and wedges of cheese sat, left behind by the men. He broke off a piece of bread and ate it mechanically, washing it down with a gulp of water from a flagon. The taste was bland, but it settled his hunger enough to think more clearly. He saw his mother entering again, this time with Edmure at her side. Roslin, presumably, remained in her chambers. Edmure's expression was grim as he approached Robb. "Your Grace," he said, half bowing in deference. Robb noticed the shadows under his uncle's eyes, and guessed he had not slept well. "I came to see how we proceed from here. Roslin is resting." "She's shaken." Robb nodded in acknowledgement. "I'm sorry her wedding turned into this. If there was another way." He trailed off, letting the unspoken truth linger. Then, gesturing for Edmure to follow, he led them to a corner of the hall where they could speak privately. Grey wind patted after him, earning anxious glances from Edmure, who was still not entirely comfortable with the huge direwolf. Once they stood apart from prying ears, Edmure began. "The men keep asking me what they should do with Roslin's younger siblings. Some are frightened children, weeping for their father. Others are older, uncertain whether to blame me for the chaos. As her husband, perhaps I can calm them." Robb saw the flicker of compassion on Catelyn's face. She nodded at Edmure. "That might be the best path. Show them that you're not here to destroy their family. Remind them that Walder brought this on himself. They might resent it, but at least they'll see your kindness." Edmure exhaled heavily. "Yes, but I fear they'll see it as condescension or a ruse. Still, I'll try." Robb placed a hand on Edmure's shoulder. "Do what you can. Even if they hate us, they might come to see Roslin as a bridge between our houses, assuming any real peace is possible. Meanwhile, we need your counsel on matters in the Riverlands. What's left of Walder's influence with the other lords? Do they all hold him in high regard, or do many resent him?" Edmure's brow furrowed. "Many resent him, truth be told. He's always been stingy, demanding tolls on the crossing, meddling in alliances. The Riverlords tolerated him because of his strategic position, not because they liked him. As for respect, I'd wager there's not much love for House Frey among the older families, but fear of his army kept them in line. No." Robb mulled that over. "Then perhaps this could work to our advantage. If the Tullys and Starks hold the twins, other Riverlords might accept it. Happily even, we're removing Walder's stranglehold. The question is whether we can secure the lines quickly enough to prevent the Lannisters from exploiting the upheaval." Before Edmure could respond, Catelyn spoke softly. Tywin Lannister might attempt to rally certain lords to his side by promising them Walder's seat if they help overthrow us. He knows that controlling the crossing is paramount. Edmure shook his head gravely. "Yes, but without Walder, will the Freys truly stand with the Lannisters? I suspect not. I believe many of them care more about their own fortunes than about an alliance with House Lannister. Now that Walder is captured, they might look after themselves first." Robb agreed. "All the more reason to keep a tight grip on the place. I plan to move out in a few days' time, once we're sure the fortress is secure. I'll gather the remainder of our forces and march either to Harrenhal or to the western lands near River Run, depending on word from our scouts." He paused, glancing at his mother and uncle. "There's also the matter of the north. The Ironborn remain a threat. My last letters from the north suggested that the bastard of Bolton, Roos's son Ramsay, was wreaking havoc, and the Ironborn still held parts of the coastline. I can't be in two places at once. Edmure raised an eyebrow. Then what do you propose? Splitting your forces? Nay, one? Robb grimaced. That seldom ends well. But I can't leave the north to fend for itself indefinitely. Might be best to hold here in the Riverlands, ensure Tywin Lannister can't crush us. Then retake Moat Cailin to secure the path north. If we can push the Ironborn out, perhaps we'd rally new men from the north to reinforce the Riverlands. So many choices, each with peril. Catelyn's eyes flickered with an unspoken worry. If you leave too soon, the twins might slip out of our control. But if you stay too long, the north suffers. Even with the strategic victory here, the war is far from won. Nay. Robb closed his eyes, a wave of weariness hitting him again. One step at a time, he said. We'll fortify the twins. I'll appoint the Grey John to command. You, uncle, can remain here a short while longer with Roslin if you wish, or you can return to River Run to reassure the people there that we haven't abandoned them. As for me, I'll weigh my next move carefully. Edmure nodded, though anxiety pinched his features. I should probably take Roslin to River Run soon, to introduce her properly to the castle. It might help quell talk of a scandal, show that the Tullys accept her. But first, let me try to ease tensions among her younger kin. Perhaps it'll prevent future grudges. Donner. Yes, Robb said. Focus on that. We don't want the next generation to rise up against us. Catelyn gazed between them, her posture subdued, but determined. I'll help in any way I can. For now, I'll see to the wounded. That's something I can do without stepping on too many toes. If any of Walder's brood is ill or injured, showing them kindness might soften their fury. Dim. Robb gave her a grateful look, then clapped Edmure's shoulder again. Go on. I'll see you both later. They parted ways. Robb remained a few moments longer in the great hall, letting Grey Wind sniff around the corners, searching for any stray bits of leftover food or a hint of danger. He marveled at how the direwolf's presence alone made some of the Frey servants keep a wide berth. Eventually, deciding to take action rather than linger in gloom, Robb headed off to the towers, wanting to see for himself if the search for letters or evidence of alliances had yielded more clues. He found a small team of his men ransacking Walder's personal solar, rummaging through chests, drawers, and cupboards. A servant from the castle was forced to stand by, watching the intrusion with visible anxiety. Robb demanded no less than thoroughness. Overturn every scrap of parchment, every hidden compartment. If Walder had stashed away a letter from Tywin, or some agreement with Roose Bolton, or any secret plot, it would be discovered now. One of the searchers, a gaunt man named Gerd, turned to Robb with a piece of parchment in hand. We found these missives, Your Grace. He handed them over. They reference a possible marriage arrangement with the Lannisters, one of Walder's granddaughters to be wed to a minor cousin in the west. It's not a direct alliance with Tywin, but it suggests strong connections. Robb scanned the lines. The writing was small and crabbed, and a cracked seal indicated it had been opened, perhaps multiple times. The text made mention of dowries, shipments of grain, and the possibility of forging deeper ties. Another note, scrawled along the margin, indicated the time frame for finalizing the arrangement. Interesting, Robb muttered. So Walder was playing both sides, promising a granddaughter to the Lannisters while supposedly upholding an alliance with us. Gerd nodded. Hey, looks that way. Robb passed it back. Keep searching. We need a complete picture. Also, check for hidden compartments in the desk or the walls. Walder is cunning. He might hide letters or valuables in secret spots. Then, Gerd moved off, and Robb wandered to the window. It overlooked the courtyard, where he could see more men hauling sacks of grain, inventorying the keep's supplies. He felt a twinge of relief that they wouldn't starve, at least if they held the twins for a lengthy period. Supplies were crucial for any siege or extended occupation. A soft knock at the doorframe made him turn. One of the younger Frey women stood there, head bowed. She could not have been older than 15, with dark hair pulled back in a messy braid. She wore a faded linen dress, and her hands twisted nervously. Robb recognized her as one of Roslin's younger half-sisters, though he couldn't recall her name. "What is it?" he asked, careful to keep his tone gentle. She swallowed, fear etched on her features. "Pardon, Your Grace. I was told to bring a message. My older brother wants to speak with you. Ryman, he calls himself. He was away last night, but returned at dawn. He is outside the gates, under a white flag." Robb's shoulders tensed. Another returning son of Walder, presumably with men at his back. How many men did he bring? The girl stammered, "Only a dozen. He says he means no harm, that he just wants to speak with whoever commands the castle now." Robb glanced at the armed men rummaging through the solar. "All right," he said. "I'll see him under guard in the courtyard. Have him disarm or remain outside until we're certain. He'll be permitted entry alone or with 2 men at most." The girl bowed quickly, relief flooding her face. "Yes, Your Grace. Thank you." She hurried off, the hem of her dress brushing the dusty floor. Robb motioned for half a dozen of his guards to join him. "To the courtyard," he ordered. "We'll greet this Sir Ryman. Stay alert." They followed him down the tower steps, passing more clusters of soldiers and startled servants. When Robb reached the main courtyard, he saw a figure standing beyond the gates, wearing a half-rusted breastplate emblazoned with twin towers. He was tall, though with a slump in his shoulders that made him appear uneasy. Next to him stood a pair of riders, armed but with swords sheathed. Robb ordered the gate unbarred just enough for one man to pass. The figure who entered had close-cropped gray hair and a drooping mustache. He held his hands away from his sides to show he wasn't reaching for a weapon. Once inside, stark guards searched him for hidden daggers, finding none. Sir Ryman Frey bowed stiffly to Robb. "Your Grace," he said in a gravelly voice. "I am Ryman House Frey, son of Walder. I was away with a small company, patrolling near Seaguard. When I returned, I learned of last night's events." Robb studied the man's face. He seemed older than many of Walder's brood, with lines around his eyes that suggested a life of worry or cynicism. "You know your father is imprisoned," Robb stated plainly. "He tried to betray us, and we took the twins." Ryman nodded, grim. "Yes, so I've been told. My father had a mind for ambitious plans." His lips pressed together. "I come to ask for mercy for those of us who were absent, who played no part in the treachery. We had no knowledge of any plan to spill blood." Robb observed him, searching for signs of deceit. "Mercy, you say? I've already offered mercy to all who surrendered. I hold no quarrel with those who took no arms against us. But if you intend to raise your own banner, or if you plan to defy me..." Ryman shook his head vigorously. "I have no interest in more bloodshed. My father, well, he is a stubborn man. But we are not all so foolish as to cross swords with the king in the north." He cast a look around the courtyard, taking in the sight of stark soldiers. "I see you hold the keep securely." "That's right," Robb said. "And will continue to hold it. Those Freys who submit to my rule here will be spared and treated fairly as prisoners of war. Or, if they wish to swear new oaths, they might eventually earn back some favor. But I will not release Walder Frey so he can conspire again." "Then Kazi." Ryman exhaled, nodding as though he expected no less. I've no love for how he's governed. He is my father, but I saw many things that troubled me. Perhaps this is the best outcome for the family, if you allow House Frey to remain in some capacity to manage these lands." He hesitated. "I wouldn't claim the lordship for myself, not without your blessing." Robb glanced at his guards. It was the first time he'd heard a Frey's son openly consider that Walder's removal might be beneficial. "That's your goal. To support my reign in exchange for a share of authority. Know that trust must be earned. Walder's betrayal nearly cost us our lives. I won't easily forget that." Ryman bowed his head. "Understood, Your Grace. I will do whatever is required to show my loyalty. The alternative is more strife, and I've seen enough war." Robb studied him a few moments longer. The man's voice shook with genuine fear, perhaps exhaustion, or both. Another older son ready to throw Walder under the wagon if it secured his own survival. Yet if Ryman was sincere, This could be a stepping stone to ensuring no further revolt. Robb decided to proceed cautiously. Return your men to the stables outside the walls. They may camp there under guard. You will stay within the keep, restricted in movement, but not in a dungeon. Cooperate, and we'll talk further about how House Frey might function under new leadership. Ryman nodded, relief in his eyes. Thank you, Your Grace. I accept. Robb signaled to a guard. Escort Sir Ryman to a secure chamber, and see that his men are watched. Any sign of duplicity, you let me know. The guard saluted, leading Ryman away. Robb remained in the courtyard, Grey Wind at his side, pondering the sudden shift. Here was a Frey son, apparently ready to part ways with Walder's dominance, or at least put on that show. Did it indicate a deeper fracture in House Frey? Possibly. Walder had so many children and grandchildren that any succession would be a tangled mess. Robb saw an opportunity. If enough of them preferred stability under Stark rule to another round of bloodshed, perhaps the twins could become an asset, rather than a burden. But he dared not rely on that alone. He gazed up at the two imposing towers, connected by the stone bridge over the cold river. Somewhere in those twisting corridors, Walder Frey stewed in anger, while his family scrambled to salvage their fortunes. The rest of Westeros would soon learn that the young wolf had turned the Red Wedding on its head, capturing the twins and punishing the treacherous host. Some would be awed, some furious, some fearful. The balance of power might shift. Night began to fall again before Robb truly realized how quickly the day had passed in a blur of conferences, decisions, and scattered revelations about the keep. He gathered a small circle of trusted bannermen in the Great Hall for a brief war council. The great John, Roose Bolton, quiet and inscrutable. Sir Wendell Manderley, sent on behalf of White Harbor, and a couple of Riverland knights who had sworn to House Tully. They sat around a long table with maps unrolled, plates of bread and salt beef, and a single candelabra. The hall felt cavernous and grim in the torchlight, but it was private enough for speaking plainly. Robb stood at the head of the table, scanning each face. We have the twins under our control. The next question is, do we linger to consolidate, or do we press on? Sir Wendell Manderley, a portly man with a thick beard, tapped a finger on the map. My Lord Father and White Harbor's fleet are beset by Ironborn raiders along the coast. We can muster ships, but the Ironborn are cunning. We'd be grateful if the king in the north could assist us soon. Robb frowned. The demands from all quarters tugged at him. I hear your plea, Sir Wendell. I want to help the north. Yet House Lannister remains a menace. If they march an army here while we withdraw, the Riverlands are lost. The Great John slapped a palm on the table. We should seize Harrenhal first. That place is a symbol of the Lannisters' hold on the Trident. Wrest it from them, and the local lords might rally. Then we can strike west or move north as needed. Bolton's quiet voice cut in. Harrenhal is a ruin, but a ruin that commands fear. Tywin Lannister has men stationed there, or at least he did. Now that we have the twins, we can approach it from the north side. However, Your Grace, consider that we do not have unlimited numbers. Another siege drains resources. Robb rubbed the bridge of his nose. Every path demands a risk. One advantage we have is that the Freys, for the moment, are neutralized. Let's give them no chance to regroup. I plan to leave the Great John here with a strong garrison. The rest of us will form a host. Our next move may be Harrenhal, or an advance toward Lannister-held territories. Once we break them in the Riverlands, we can pivot to the north. Aye. The men exchanged looks. Roose Bolton dipped his head. An ambitious plan, Your Grace. I'll see that my men are ready. The Great John rumbled. I'll hold the twins as you command, with a garrison that will make Walder's brood tremble. But don't wait too long to do what must be done about Tywin. He's as cunning as a fox. Robb nodded. Agreed. They talked deeper into the night, weighing supply lines, potential reinforcements, messages to send to Riverrun and the other allied houses. By the time they adjourned, Robb's mind churned with possibilities. He realized that victory here was only the first turn in a labyrinth of war. And yet, At least they had avoided the fate of being slaughtered at a wedding feast. That alone felt like a momentous pivot in their fortunes. After the council, Robb lingered behind as the men filed out, discussing minor details among themselves. The candles on the table dripped hot wax, the air heavy with the lingering smell of ashes and tallow. Gray Wind dozed near one of the pillars, half watching, half asleep. Robb trailed his fingers across the map. The old corners were frayed, and the ink lines representing roads and rivers blurred in the dim light. He traced the path from the Twins to River Run, then to Harrenhal, and farther west toward the Westerlands. Another route led north, toward Moat Cailin and Winterfell. Each path demanded a choice. Each choice carried a cost. Eventually, he rolled up the map and tucked it under his arm, then headed to the courtyard. Outside, the sky spread dark, studded with faint stars. A few torches burned along the walls, and distant lamplight flickered in windows. Most men had turned in, exhausted, though a handful of guards paced the parapets. Robb walked with unhurried steps, trying to clear his head. Gray Wind prowled at his side, nose sniffing the night air. A chill wind blew across the yard, carrying the scent of the river. Robb thought again of his father, of how Ned Stark might have managed this. Perhaps he would have sought a less bloody path. But Walder Frey would not have allowed that. The old man was treacherous and proud. In another world, Ned himself might have been forced to undertake the same dreadful measures. If so, Ned would have worn the same haunted look that Robb now felt upon his face. He gazed up at the silhouettes of the towers against the star-pinned sky. Somewhere in those chambers, children huddled under blankets, motherless or fatherless in the wake of the night's violence. Such was war, painting new tragedies every day. Robb swallowed, determined to make the most of this tenuous advantage for the good of the North. So much pain had been endured. But if it led to peace for his people, at least it wouldn't be in vain. A soldier approached from the shadows, looking a bit nervous to disturb him. "Your Grace, there's someone at the stable yard who requests a word. Says it's urgent." Robb raised an eyebrow. "Another Frey? Or one of ours?" "He claims to be a messenger from the Neck. Carried your sigil, but arrived without fanfare. He insisted it was for your ears alone." Robb's heart quickened. The Neck, Moat Cailin, or the marshes. Perhaps new intelligence from his men posted there. Or an urgent call for help from the north. "Very well," he said. "I'll speak with him. Take me there." They crossed through a small archway leading behind the main stables, where horses dozed in their stalls, occasionally stamping a hoof. A single torch illuminated a figure standing near a pack horse. He was a lean, road-worn man in mud-caked boots, a battered cloak draped over his shoulders. When he saw Robb, he dipped his head quickly and reached into a leather pouch, producing a sealed letter. The wax bore a half-broken direwolf sigil. "Your Grace," he said, voice tight with exhaustion. "I rode day and night from Moat Cailin. We tried to find you at River Run but heard you were at the Twins." Robb accepted the letter, noticing how the seal had cracked from rough handling. He opened it carefully in the torchlight, scanning the contents. The words made his blood run cold. Ironborn raids had intensified in the north, pillaging along the stony shore and Bear Island's environs. More worrying, there were rumors that the bastard of Bolton had taken the seat of the Dreadfort in his father's absence, wreaking horrors on the local populace. Reports conflicted, but it seemed the north was in chaos. The letter begged for the king's return, or at least for reinforcements. Robb's free hand clenched. He'd known the north was under threat, but this sounded worse. He read again, eyes narrowing. The writer pleaded for direction, stating that loyal clans in the mountains needed leadership, that Winterfell was empty and vulnerable. And looming over everything, the Ironborn presence remained a plague. He looked up from the letter at the messenger. "Did you witness these attacks yourself?" The man swallowed, eyes hollow. "Some, yes. The Ironborn strike smaller villages. The bastard's men roam between them. Folk say he flays any who defy him. They're terrified, Your Grace." Robb's jaw tightened. The messenger's trembling voice seemed genuine, matching the stark words on the page. He envisioned the north, his homeland, overrun by both seaborne raiders and a cruel traitor. How many innocents had died while he was busy warring in the south? A sense of guilt and fury twisted in his gut. "Thank you," Robb said quietly, handing the man a small coin from his pouch. "We'll find you food and rest. Leave your horse in the stable. I'll prepare a reply." The man nodded, relief in his eyes. "Thank you, Your Grace." Robb turned away, letter in hand. Grey Wind let out a low growl, as if the direwolf sensed his master's anger. Robb set a hand on the wolf's ruff, gazing into the darkness. The freed North. It was always the dream. Yet the North was anything but free now. Could he truly keep waging war in the Riverlands if his own homeland burned under the Ironborn and a Bolton's cruelty? He realized, with a sinking feeling, that if he did not act soon, the North might be lost to him altogether, its people too frightened or battered to stand by him. The betrayal of the Freys was enough to choke on. But what if the Boltons proved equally treacherous? Roose might have a hand in controlling his bastard, or he might not. Either way, dividing his forces to retake the North was risky. Tywin Lannister would relish striking them while their backs were turned. Yet the letter left little room for complacency. The North was calling to him, and he was its king. He stood for a time in the stable yard, silent except for the snorts of horses and the distant lap of water against the fortress walls. Then he looked to Grey Wind and murmured, "We can't abandon our home, boy. One way or another we must save it." Grey Wind nosed his hand, breath warm against his skin, as if in agreement. Robb closed his eyes. Tomorrow he would have to gather his lords once more, break the news of this dire situation, and see who would march north with him. Harrenhal, the Riverlands, the twins. Each demanded attention, but the North was bleeding. If he left the twins in the Great John's capable hands, perhaps the Riverlands front could hold steady under Edmure and the Tully banner. Meanwhile, Robb might lead a portion of his host up the King's Road, retaking Moat Cailin and halting the Ironborn advance. Yet what if Tywin Lannister swooped in to crush the Tullys in his absence? Robb sighed. War demanded all or nothing in every direction. But Ned Stark's voice resonated in his memory. "The North is your home. If you fail it, you fail everything." In that conviction, Robb found a glimmer of resolve. He turned from the stable yard, heading back inside to pen a series of letters, each containing orders for the next stage. The trap he had set for the Freys had saved him from certain doom, but it had thrust him onto a precarious high ground. Now, any misstep could send him plunging into ruin. Yet the direwolf sigil on the letter reminded him that the North needed its king. He would not fail them. He could not. All through the night, he wrote by candlelight, drafting commands for the Great John, instructions for Edmure, warnings to White Harbor, appeals to the mountain clans. Occasionally, he paused to soothe Grey Wind or to rest his eyes against the throbbing ache of fatigue. But he pressed on. By the time dawn's early glow seeped through the window slits, he'd laid out a plan as best he could. He would ride north in a week's time. Once the twins were thoroughly secured, half his forces would remain in the Riverlands under Edmure Tully's overall command, supported by Roose Bolton's men, though Robb would keep a wary watch on the latter. The Great John would hold the twins. Robb would take the other half northward, smashing the Ironborn and punishing any Bolton treachery. That was the shape of the plan. It was not perfect, but it was a start. As he rose from the chair, stiff-limbed, he saw a crack of sunlight slice across the table. Another day beginning at the twins, another day as king in the North. He prayed the gods might grant him strength to endure the trials to come. One thing was certain. The Red Wedding that had nearly doomed them now stood as a testament to House Stark's resolve. Walder Frey sat in chains below, his brood subdued. But outside these walls lay a war that had only grown more complicated. Robb left the chamber, summoning a scribe to copy the letters. Grey Wind padded at his side, a silent sentinel. Each echo of their footfalls on the stone reminded Robb that there was no turning back. Once these letters went out, his course was set. He offered a final private plea to the old gods of the North for guidance, then strode onward, determined to protect his people and finish what he had begun. Only time and the fortunes of war would show if his cunning at the twins would bring him the victory his father's memory demanded. Or, if, in outsmarting one enemy, he had simply delayed doom for another day.